By the time Dante Bellafiori understood that the safest room in his casino had become a trap, the quiet woman from his kitchen was already dragging him through smoke, broken glass, and the kind of silence that only comes after men stop breathing. For almost a year, Mara Voss had carried trays past his guards, with her eyes lowered and flour on her sleeves. She had been the woman no one remembered, the heavy overnight supervisor with the limp, the soft voice, the round face, and the shapeless black uniform that made her look like part of the kitchen walls. Men with guns stepped around her. Men with money spoke over her. Men who thought fear was the same thing as power never once wondered why a woman who moved that slowly always knew exactly where every exit was. The Crown Heron Casino glittered over New Orleans, like a crown set too close to dark water. From the street, it looked like a palace of gold lights, glass balconies, velvet ropes, and music that never really stopped. Tourists came for champagne, cards, and the feeling that luck might choose them for one night. But beneath the bright casino floor, beneath the kitchens and locked counting rooms, beneath the private elevators that only opened for Dante's people, the old river tunnels waited in the dark. They had been there long before the casino, damp and narrow and breathing warm steam through cracked brick. Most people working inside the Crown Heron had heard stories about them. Mara had mapped them. She worked the overnight shift because the night belonged to people who did not ask many questions. At 11, the public restaurants slowed down. The tourists grew drunk and loud, and the real guests began to arrive. Men in pressed shirts and dark jackets came through the rear entrance with hard eyes and soft footsteps. Dock bosses wanted gumbo at midnight. Card dealers with bruised knuckles wanted coffee so strong it tasted burned. Dante's captains wanted steak, cigarettes, and privacy. Mara gave them all what they asked for. She kept the ovens hot, the knives clean, and her face blank. To the men upstairs, she was harmless. They saw her thick arms lifting heavy trays and thought only of her size. They saw the way she favored one leg when she crossed the tile and thought only of weakness. They saw her lower her gaze whenever they passed and believed it was fear. Mara let them believe all of it. She knew how easy it was for powerful men to mistake quiet for empty. She knew how quickly cruelty made them careless. So she moved through their world like steam, present, useful, ignored, and impossible to hold. She knew that the guard beside the service elevator checked his phone every 13 minutes. She knew the camera outside the dry storage room had a blind spot near the flower racks. She knew the emergency keypad behind the wine wall was wiped clean every morning except for 2 numbers, because Rossi, Dante's security chief, always pressed too hard with his thumb. She knew which men carried knives on the left, which men carried guns on the right, and which men were too proud to notice someone breathing behind them. She knew that the private sky lounge had 3 doors, but only one path that did not pass through a kill zone. And she knew Dante Bellafiori, feared king of the Gulf Coast, had built an empire so tall he had forgotten to look at the woman standing in the kitchen below it. Dante was young for the weight he carried, but no one ever called him young to his face. He ruled gambling, shipping, union contracts, and favors owed by men who wore badges in daylight and took envelopes at night. He had the polished calm of someone who never raised his voice because other people did the shouting for him. His suits were dark, his smile rare, and his anger quiet enough to make a room go cold. When he entered the kitchen, the workers straightened. The captains stopped laughing. Even the old dishwashers kept their heads down. Mara never looked directly at him for more than a second. That was part of the shape she wore, but she noticed him anyway. She noticed the faint stiffness in his left shoulder from an old injury. She noticed that he never sat with his back to a door. She noticed he trusted his adopted brother Nico with matters no one else was allowed to touch. She noticed that he trusted Luca with business, Rossi with security, and himself with everything else. That, Mara thought, was his greatest weakness. Dante believed betrayal would have a stranger's face. The storm came on a Thursday. rolling in from the Gulf with thunder that shook the casino windows. Rain washed the streets silver, and the river rose dark and restless against the old stone walls below. By midnight, the casino was still busy, but the air had changed. People laughed too loudly. Glasses clinked too sharply. The building seemed to hold its breath between every roll of thunder. Mara felt it before anyone told her about the meeting upstairs. She saw 3 extra guards by the private elevator. She saw Luca come through the kitchen without touching his food. She saw Rossi snap at a dealer for standing in the wrong place. Then one of Dante's men pushed through the swinging doors and told her the boss wanted a late tray in the restricted lounge. Nothing messy, he said. Nothing that dripped. Men like him always thought the food mattered. Mara prepared roasted chicken, charred peppers, warm bread, olives, and a pot of dark coffee. Her hands moved slowly where others could see, but her mind moved through the casino with perfect speed. Restricted lounge, sky level, dock representatives, missing shipment, union pressure. Rossi nervous, Luca quiet, storm covering sound. Something was wrong. She loaded the tray and took the service elevator up alone. The metal box hummed softly around her. Her reflection in the brushed steel looked like the woman she had spent years building. Wide body, tired eyes, hair pinned back. Flower at one cuff, a limp that came and went just enough to be believed. She looked like someone no enemy would waste a bullet on. The doors opened into a private hallway above the casino, where the carpet was thick enough to swallow footsteps, and the walls were lined with gold-framed mirrors. Mara pushed the tray forward, her limp just a little heavier than usual. At the end of the hall, the Sky Lounge doors stood open. Dante was inside, near the windows, the storm lighting his profile in pale flashes. Luca stood to his right, one hand near his jacket. Rossi stood by the bar, his thick neck flushed with anger as he argued with 2 dockmen who looked like they wished they were anywhere else. The room smelled of rain, leather, expensive smoke, and the sharp edge of fear people tried to hide under cologne. Mara entered with her eyes down. Rossi saw her first and curled his lip. "Move faster," he muttered. "You sound like a dying horse dragging that cart." The dockmen laughed because Rossi laughed. Luca did not. Dante did not look over. Mara gave a small apology and kept moving. She placed the tray on the side table. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. As she poured coffee into small white cups, she listened. A shipment had vanished somewhere between the river warehouses and the eastern docks. Someone had changed the route after Dante signed off. One union contact was missing. Another was dead. Rossi blamed outsiders. Luca blamed panic. Dante blamed no one yet, which made him more dangerous than both of them. Then the lights flickered. It was only a heartbeat of darkness, but Mara's body reacted before her face did. Her eyes lifted to the mirror beside the bar. In the reflection, she saw the private elevator numbers freeze. She saw Rossi glance toward his earpiece. She saw Dante's hand move half an inch toward his jacket. The blast came from the service entrance. It did not sound like the wild explosion of street violence. It was too clean for that, too shaped. The reinforced door folded inward with a hard metallic scream, and smoke rolled across the lounge in a gray wave. Marble cracked. Glass burst. Someone shouted. Someone else fell. The first shots were soft, almost polite, because the rifles were suppressed. Luca died before he cleared his holster. Rossi fired twice toward the smoke, then jerked backward as the window behind him bloomed red. A sniper from outside. Clean angle. High roof. Mara registered it all while the room broke apart around her. The dockmen dropped under the table. Dante was thrown behind the bar, blood at his temple, his pistol sliding across the floor and spinning out of reach. Through the smoke came men who did not move like local crews. Their steps were measured. Their shoulders stayed low. Their rifles swept corners in disciplined arcs. They wore black gear without markings, faces hidden, voices clipped through encrypted comms. They were not here to scare anyone. They were here to erase. The lead attacker stepped over Luca's body and raised his rifle toward Dante. For the first time in nearly a year, Mara Voss stopped pretending to be slow. She crossed the room with a force no one expected from the quiet kitchen woman. Her limp vanished. Her shoulders dropped. Her body drove forward like a storm breaking loose from its cage. She hit Dante hard enough to knock the breath out of him and slammed him behind a marble column just as bullets tore through the place where his chest had been. Dante stared at her, stunned and furious, one hand gripping her sleeve. "What are you doing?" "Saving you," Mara said. Her voice was still soft, but something inside it had changed. It no longer asked permission to exist. She grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him low. Dante was not a small man, but Mara moved him with brutal certainty, using his weight, the broken floor, and the cover of smoke like she had rehearsed it 100 times. He tried to resist, more from shock than sense, but she hooked one thick arm around his waist and drove him toward the hidden counting room behind the lounge. His eyes sharpened. "How do you know about that door?" Mara did not answer. She pressed her flour-dusted palm to the carved panel beside the liquor shelves, then entered a rotating code Dante had changed only that morning. The wall unlocked. The narrow vault room opened with a deep mechanical sigh. Inside were emergency ledgers, cash drawers, blackmail files, and armored glass thick enough to stop rifle fire. Mara shoved him in. Dante turned on her with sudden rage. "Open this door!" Instead, she sealed it from the outside. The lock dropped with a heavy final sound. Dante slammed his fist against the glass hard enough to shake it. "Mara!" It was the first time he had ever said her name like it mattered. Smoke curled around her body. The lights pulsed red from the emergency system. Behind the glass, Dante's face shifted from anger to disbelief as Mara stepped backward into the ruined lounge instead of hiding beside him. The first attacker came through the hallway near the vault, rifle raised. He moved carefully, checking the floor, the walls, the corners. He did not check above him. Mara had already climbed onto the decorative beam running beneath the ceiling, her fingers locked around an exposed pipe, her heavy body balanced in the narrow dark like something patient and terrible. When the man passed under her, she dropped. Her full weight struck his shoulders and drove him down with a sharp, final crack. The sound was not loud, but Dante heard it through the glass. His hand lowered from the door, his mouth parted slightly. Mara rolled off the body, took the sidearm, took the knife, and reached beneath her loose kitchen uniform. A compact pistol appeared in her hand, black and familiar against her flour-marked fingers. The second attacker froze when he saw her. For one fatal second, he saw the same thing everyone else had seen, a fat kitchen worker, a woman who should have been crying, a mistake in the middle of a battlefield. Mara fired twice. The first shot slammed into his armor and folded him back. The second found the soft place beneath his jaw. He hit the carpet before his warning left his throat. Behind the armored glass, Dante Bellafiori stood very still. This was a man who had watched killers work since he was a boy. He knew street violence, revenge violence, desperate violence, and professional violence. He knew the difference between a guard with a gun and a weapon-wearing skin. And now, watching Mara move through his private lounge with smoke around her and blood on the floor, he understood with a cold, almost beautiful terror that he had never known what lived inside his own casino. The team leader saw her then. He was smarter than the others. He did not pause. He fired through the smoke, controlled and fast, bullets chewing into the bar, the walls, the column. Mara dropped low behind a rolling cart, kicked it hard, and sent bottles crashing across the floor. Liquor spread like dark water. A flashbang bounced near her foot, but she snatched a velvet curtain from the broken window frame and smothered the device beneath it before the burst could blind her. The room flashed white under the fabric. The sound punched the air. Mara was already moving. The leader advanced, rifle tight to his shoulder. Mara came in low, not graceful, not pretty, not like the thin women in the stories men like to tell. She came in solid. She came in heavy. She came in like her body had always been a promise waiting to be kept. Her shoulder drove into his ribs and slammed him into the wall, his rifle trapped between them. His breath left him in a broken gasp. He reached for his knife, but Mara was faster. Her hand closed around his wrist. Her other hand drove the boning knife up beneath the weak seam of his armor. The man stiffened. Mara leaned close, her round face calm, her soft voice almost gentle. "You should have checked the kitchen." Then she pulled the blade free and let him fall. For a moment, the Sky Lounge was quiet, except for rain, alarms, and Dante's slow breathing behind the glass. Mara stood among broken marble, fallen men, and drifting smoke, her black kitchen uniform torn at one sleeve, her hair loose from its pins, her limp gone as if it had never existed. She searched the team leader's body with quick, practiced hands. When she turned his wrist over, she saw the burned mark in his skin. A black crescent inside a broken circle. The color drained from her face, but not from fear, from recognition. Behind the glass, Dante watched her expression change and felt something inside his world tilt. This attack had not only come for him. This woman had known danger before his name ever touched her life. She had worn invisibility like armor inside his kingdom, and he, like every other arrogant man around him, had mistaken it for weakness. Mara walked back to the vault door and entered the code again. The lock opened. Dante stepped out slowly, blood drying near his temple, his eyes fixed on her as if seeing her for the first time. "Who are you?" he asked. Mara looked past him toward the smoke-filled hall, where more footsteps were already coming. "The reason they're here," she said. And before Dante could demand another answer, she pressed the dead man's rifle into his hands and led him into the walls of his own casino. The walls of the Crown Heron Casino were warmer than Dante expected. Heat rolled through the narrow service passage in slow breaths, carrying the smell of dust, old wires, wet concrete, and something faintly sweet from the kitchens below. He had owned this building for years, had bought politicians to approve it, judges to protect it, and inspectors to ignore the parts of it that should never have passed a single safety report. Yet as Mara pulled him through the hidden passage with one hand on his sleeve and a stolen rifle braced against her shoulder, Dante understood that she knew his fortress better than he did. She did not hesitate at the turns. She did not stop to think. She moved through the bones of his kingdom like she had been living inside them long before he ever put his name on the door. Behind them, boots thundered across the destroyed Sky Lounge. Voices crackled through comms. Men shouted that the primary target had moved. Dante heard that phrase clearly, even through the ringing in his ears. Primary target, not Voss, not Bellafiori, not Dante. He looked at Mara's back, at the torn black fabric of her kitchen uniform, at the way her thick body filled the cramped passage without slowing her down, and a cold realization crawled through him. She had told the truth. The soldiers who had breached his private floor had not come to kill him first. They had come for the woman every one of his men had ignored. Mara stopped at a rusted ladder and looked over her shoulder. Her face was calm, but her eyes were not. Her eyes were far away, fixed on a memory Dante could not see. "Climb down," she whispered. Dante tightened his grip on the rifle. "Not until you tell me what Black Harbor is." For a moment, only the rain answered. It rattled somewhere above them, a soft hiss against glass and steel. Mara stared at him, and for the first time since she had thrown him into the vault, she looked tired. Not weak, never that, but tired in a way that felt older than the storm, older than the casino, older than the name on her fake employee file. Black Harbor is what powerful people hire when they need a crime to look like an accident, she said. They take witnesses, erase rivals, move hostages, bury politicians, and make clean men look dirty and dirty men look dead. They are not a gang. They are not a family. They are a machine. Dante's jaw hardened. And you worked for them. I was one of their knives. She said it plainly. No pride, no apology, just truth. Dante studied her in the dim red emergency glow. The kitchen woman was gone now. The lowered eyes, the slow voice, the uneven walk. All of it had fallen away like a cheap costume. In front of him stood a woman built from secrets, patience, and violence, so controlled it almost felt sacred. He wanted to be angry that she had hidden inside his house. He wanted to demand loyalty, answers, payment. But the dead men upstairs were proof enough that his old rules had already been burned away. What happened? He asked. Mara looked down the ladder shaft. They ordered me to kill someone who could not defend herself. A pregnant witness. She had proof that would ruin a foreign minister. Black Harbor wanted her gone before she could testify. I refused. Dante's eyes narrowed. You walked away? I killed the handler they sent to watch me. I hid the woman. Then I disappeared. Her mouth curved, but it was not a smile. That was years ago. Since then, I have been hotel staff, hospital laundry, bus station janitor, night cook, warehouse cleaner, jobs where rich men and violent men look through you. A fat woman in a kitchen is the best ghost in the world. People see the body and think they have seen the whole person. Something quiet shifted in Dante's chest. He thought of Rossi's cruel mouth, the captains laughing, the dockmen sneering as Mara placed food before them. He thought of himself walking past her for months without ever asking why she noticed everything and said almost nothing. Shame was not an emotion he allowed often. It came now anyway, sharp and unwelcome. A burst of gunfire cracked somewhere above them. Mara turned back to the ladder. They could not have breached your upper floor without help. Someone gave them codes, elevator access, camera timing, everything. Dante went still. The name rose in his mind before he wanted it to. Nico, his adopted brother, his trusted advisor, the man who knew the family houses, the off-book accounts, the way Dante changed the private security codes when the weather turned bad because storms made him uneasy. Dante hated the thought the moment it appeared, but he did not push it away. A ruler survived by listening to the ugliest possibility first. They climbed down through the walls while the casino groaned around them. Somewhere below, alarms wailed over the muffled chaos of the public floor. Guests would be running now, screaming beneath the gold chandeliers, spilling drinks across velvet carpets, calling the police who already owed Dante more favors than they could afford to repay. But none of that mattered inside the service shaft. In there, the world was only metal, breath, heat, and Mara's steady hand reaching back once when Dante's blood-slick fingers slipped on the ladder. They reached the kitchen level through a panel behind the dry storage room. The familiar smell of garlic, oil, flour, and hot metal floated through the air. For a strange second, it looked almost normal. Pots hung from hooks. White towels sat folded near the sinks. A half-cut bundle of parsley waited on a board where Mara had left it less than an hour before. Then a shadow moved near the freezer corridor. Mara pushed Dante back with her elbow. The attacker came around the corner slowly, rifle raised, helmet tilted toward the service door. Mara stepped into view with her shoulders slumped, one hand pressed against her side as if wounded. The man saw the uniform first. He saw the size. He saw what he had been trained by a cruel world to dismiss. His rifle lowered by a fraction. That fraction was all Mara needed. She caught the handle of a boiling stockpot with a towel and hurled the steaming liquid across the tile. The attacker staggered back with a strangled cry. Mara was already moving. She slammed him into the steel prep table hard enough to send knives clattering to the floor, hooked one thick arm across his throat, and drove him down until his body stopped fighting. Dante watched from the storage doorway, his rifle ready but unused, his heartbeat slow and heavy. He had seen men kill with anger. Mara killed with certainty. She took the attacker's weapon, checked his pockets, and found a small encrypted radio. A voice hissed through it, asking for status. Mara crushed it under her shoe. "This way," Dante said quietly, pointing toward a narrow door behind the old dumbwaiter shaft. "There is a cash route below the kitchen. My father used it before the casino went public. It connects to the river tunnels." Mara looked at him. "You are sure?" Dante gave a grim smile. "I may not know my walls as well as you do, but I know where my family hid money." Together they entered the shaft. The passage dropped them into a low corridor where the air changed at once. The casino's perfume of smoke and money vanished. Beneath it was the old city, wet and dark, breathing through brick lungs. Pipes sweated above their heads. Water ran in thin silver lines along the floor. The storm pressed against the world outside, and the river tunnels answered with groans that sounded almost alive. Black Harbor's second team found them there. Mara heard them before Dante did. She lifted one hand, and he stopped. The tunnel ahead was full of steam leaking from a cracked valve. Through the white fog came three shapes, slow and careful. Mara pulled Dante into a side chamber filled with hanging laundry bags from the casino hotel. White cloth swayed softly around them, like ghosts. One soldier passed close enough for Dante to see the black crescent burned into his wrist. Mara moved from behind the hanging bags without a sound. Her arm locked around the man's neck. Her weight turned. Her hip drove back, and he vanished into the drainage channel with barely a splash. The second soldier turned toward the sound, and Dante fired once, striking the wall near his head. The man ducked by instinct, right into Mara's reach. She hit the steam valve with the butt of her rifle. Hot vapor burst across the tunnel, and the man stumbled blind. Mara drove him into the brick, took his weapon, and left him folded at the base of the wall. The last one tried to run. Mara shot him low, not to kill. He went down hard, sliding through shallow water, gasping beneath the red blink of an old emergency bulb. Dante approached with the rifle trained on him, but Mara crouched first. Her face was close to the wounded man's, soft and calm, in a way that made the soldier tremble more than shouting ever could. "Who opened the Crown Heron?" she asked. The man spat something ugly through his pain. Mara pressed 2 fingers to the mark on his wrist. His face went white. "Who?" she asked again. The soldier looked from Mara to Dante, and his fear made the tunnel feel colder. "Dante Bellafiori," he whispered. "He gave us the access. He gave us the timing. He said you would both be dead before dawn." Dante did not move. For one long moment, he became so still that even Mara looked up at him carefully. The river dripped around them. Thunder moved above the city like a giant dragging chains through the clouds. Dante's face emptied of expression, but his eyes told the truth. Grief hit him first. Not loud, not dramatic, just a silent crack inside the man who thought blood and loyalty could still mean something in his world. Then the grief turned into rage. "Nico is at St. Orsino," Dante said. His voice had no softness left in it. "If he thinks I am dead, he will call the captains there before morning. He will need them to bow fast, before anyone hears a different story." Mara rose. "Then we move before he finishes lying." The wounded soldier made a small sound, maybe a plea, maybe a curse. Mara did not let him finish it. When she stood again, Dante did not ask what she had done. He only followed her deeper into the tunnel. The underground garage waited behind a private loading gate where Dante's armored Bentley sat under dull yellow lights. Rainwater poured through cracks in the concrete, pooling around the tires. Mara slid behind the wheel before Dante could argue. He opened his mouth, then closed it when she looked at him. "You know the city above?" she said. "I know how men chase." The gate rose just enough for the Bentley to slip through. They shot into the flooded service road beneath the city. the engine roaring against the low ceiling. Behind them, headlights appeared, then more, black harbor vehicles, dark and heavy, gaining fast through the water-slick tunnel. Dante braced one hand against the dash. "Can you outrun them?" Mara's hands tightened on the wheel. No. She hit the brakes. The first pursuing SUV slammed into the Bentley's reinforced rear with a sound like thunder trapped underground. Its hood crumpled. Its front wheels buckled. Mara accelerated again before the second vehicle could swerve. She took a hard turn, let the Bentley's weight slide, then crushed the next SUV against the tunnel wall until sparks burst bright and wild in the dark. Dante stared at her, half furious, half mesmerized. "You drive like you fight," he said. "I fight like I survive," Mara replied. By the time they surfaced near the river warehouses, the vehicles behind them were burning in the tunnels, their smoke swallowed by rain. The city looked washed and haunted. New Orleans shimmered under the storm, all iron balconies, wet brick, neon reflections, and secrets too old to die. Mara drove without asking directions, cutting through streets Dante had not used since childhood. At last, she stopped at an abandoned cold storage building near the river, a place with broken windows and a faded sign no one had bothered to remove. Inside, the building was not abandoned at all. Behind a false wall, Mara had built a safe site. Weapons, cash, forged documents, medical supplies, radios, body armor, and maps waited in clean, careful rows. Dante stepped inside slowly. He had safe houses all across the Gulf Coast, but this was different. His were built by money. Mara's was built by fear, discipline, and years of expecting every quiet night to become the last one. She pulled off the ruined kitchen uniform without ceremony, revealing dark tactical clothing beneath. The padded vest fit close across her wide chest. Her arms were thick, bruised, and powerful. Her body was not the soft joke his men had made it. It was leverage. It was weight. It was endurance. It was the reason men underestimated her, and the weapon that punished them for it. Dante looked at her for a long time. Mara noticed. "Say what you are thinking." "I am thinking," Dante said, slowly removing his blood-stained jacket, "that every man in my house who mocked you was lucky you were hiding." Mara gave a low, humorless laugh. "They were lucky I was tired." She tossed him a clean shirt, a pistol, and a black coat from a locker. "Nico will have guards." "He will have my guards," Dante said, and something cold passed through his voice. "That is worse." "No," Mara said. "It is easier. Your guards expect you to arrive with noise. They expect fear, cars, shouting, men kicking doors open. They do not expect me." The St. Orsino Club stood above the river like a memory that refused to rot. It had once been a private lounge for judges, bankers, and old families who pretended their money was clean because it had been dirty for generations. Tonight, its windows glowed amber through the rain. Inside, Nico Bellafiori stood at the head of a long table beneath a painted ceiling, wearing grief like an expensive suit. The captains sat around him, uneasy and silent. Some had blood on their cuffs from the chaos at the casino. Some looked afraid. Some looked hungry. Nico spoke softly, telling them Dante had died in an attack by rivals, that the family was exposed, that leadership could not wait until morning. He said all the right words: stability, survival, legacy, family. Lies always sounded better when wrapped in words men wanted to believe. Then the lights went out. The room fell into darkness so complete that even the rain seemed to hold its breath. A guard near the east door made a small choking sound and dropped. Another turned toward the noise and vanished backward into shadow. A suppressed shot whispered near the bar. Then another. Chairs scraped. One captain cursed. Nico shouted for emergency power, but nothing answered him except the soft, steady sound of someone moving through the dark. When the lights returned, Dante Bellafiori stood in the doorway. He was soaked with rain, bloodied at the temple, and very much alive. Behind him stood Mara Voss. No flower, no limp, no lowered eyes. She held a rifle across her body and looked at the room as if she had already measured every breath inside it. The captains froze. Nico went pale so quickly he looked almost sick. Dante walked in slowly. No one spoke. No one reached for him. The power in the room bent around him, but this time it did not belong to him alone. It stretched toward the woman at his back, toward her calm face and steady hands, toward the terrible truth that she had walked through soldiers, tunnels, and betrayal without once asking permission to survive. "Nico," Dante said. His brother tried to smile. It died on his lips. "Dante, thank God. You thought I was dead." Nico swallowed. "We all did. I was trying to hold the family together. You sold the family." The room went colder than the storm outside. Nico's mask cracked. His eyes darted to the captains, looking for support, but found only fear. "Black Harbor wanted her," he said suddenly, pointing at Mara. "You think this is about me? They came for her. She brought this into our house. I made a deal to protect what was left." Mara did not move. Dante's expression did not change. "You gave them my codes." "I gave them a problem," Nico snapped. "You were losing control. Federal heat, missing shipments, port trouble, all of it closing in. I saw the future before you did. Black Harbor was going to take her one way or another. I made sure the family survived." "You made sure you survived," Dante said. One nervous captain reached under the table. Mara fired before his fingers touched the gun. The shot cracked into the wood, inches from his hand, sending splinters across his sleeve. He jerked back, shaking. "Palms on the table," Mara said. Her voice was quiet. Every man obeyed. Dante walked to Nico until they were close enough to share breath. For a moment, the old pain returned. Nico had been a boy in his mother's kitchen once. A scared boy with scraped hands and hungry eyes. Dante had given him a name, a room, a place at the table, and Nico had traded all of it to outsiders who burned marks into their own skin and hunted women through the world. "I trusted you with my mother's house," Dante said, "with my accounts, with my men, with my back." Nico's eyes shone with panic now. "Dante, please, we are brothers." Dante leaned close. "No, we were." The shot was quiet compared to the thunder. Nico dropped beside the chair he had planned to claim as a throne. No one moved. Dante turned to the captains. Rain streaked down the tall windows behind him. Mara stood at his side now, not behind him, and every man in the room noticed. "Nico died tonight during an attempted robbery of my casino," Dante said. "He died loyal in the story we will tell the city. Any man who disagrees with that story can follow him before sunrise." Silence answered. It was the purest oath the room could give. By dawn, the crown heron still stood. The official story moved through New Orleans before the rain even stopped. Rival gunmen had attacked the casino. Nico Bellafiori had died trying to protect the family. Dante had survived by luck, force, and the loyalty of unnamed guards. The police repeated what they were paid to repeat. The newspapers printed what they were handed. The captains bowed because they understood the new shape of the world. But in the private upper room of the St. Orsino Club, with the city waking pale and wet beyond the glass, Dante and Mara stood alone. For the first time all night, Mara looked exhausted. Not broken, just human. She leaned against the window frame, her dark clothes streaked with dust, her round face bruised near the jaw, her hands still steady, even as her eyes softened toward the river. Dante stood a few feet away, watching her with the focus of a man who had just survived death and found something more dangerous than fear. "Black Harbor knows you are here," he said. Mara nodded. "Yes. You could run. I have been running for years." And are you tired? She looked at him then. No disguise, no soft lie, no kitchen ghost. More than you know. Dante stepped closer, but not too close. Some instinct told him Mara was not a woman to be claimed by force, not if he wanted to keep the hand he reached with. Then stop running. A faint smile touched her mouth. That easy? No, Dante said. Not easy, but possible. I have ports, money, houses, men, judges, police, ships, casinos, and people who owe me their lives. You have a mind that turned my own building into a weapon, and hands that made trained soldiers afraid of the dark. Alone, they will keep hunting you. With me, we make this city a trap. Mara looked back at the river. Morning light crept over the water, grey and silver. For years, she had survived by shrinking, by changing her walk, rounding her shoulders, softening her voice, letting cruel men laugh, because laughter was safer than recognition. She had made invisibility into shelter, but shelter was still a cage when you never chose when to leave it. I will not cook for your men again, she said. Dante's mouth curved. No. I will not lower my eyes because one of your captains thinks my body gives him permission to be cruel. Any captain foolish enough to try will learn better once. I do not belong to you. The smile faded from Dante's face, but not with anger, with understanding. He stepped close enough for her to feel the warmth of him, close enough for the air between them to tighten. No, he said softly, you stand with me. Mara studied him for a long moment. He was still Dante Bellafiori, still dangerous, still the kind of man mothers warned their sons not to cross and their daughters not to trust. But he was also the first powerful man in a very long time who had seen what she was and not asked her to become smaller. He had offered not a cage, not charity, not a hiding place, but a war room. She placed her hand in his. Dante closed his fingers around hers, firm and careful, as if he understood that the woman before him was not something fragile to protect, but something rare to respect. Outside, the sun rose over New Orleans, touching the river, the rooftops, the casino towers, and the old streets where secrets slept under every stone. From that night on, Mara Voss was never again the invisible woman in the kitchen. She became the shadow commander of the Bellafiori Empire, the hidden blade behind every locked door, the quiet voice that turned the river tunnels into escape routes, the casinos into fortresses, and the old city into a maze that swallowed enemies whole. Men who once laughed at her size learned to lower their voices when she entered a room. Captains who had mocked her limp stood when she passed. And far beyond New Orleans, in the cold offices where Black Harbor gave orders and burned symbols into skin, people began whispering her name with the kind of fear usually reserved for ghosts. Dante remained the most feared Mafia boss on the Gulf Coast, but he was no longer the only monster in his kingdom. Beside him stood a woman the world had dismissed as too heavy, too quiet, too plain, too slow, too easy to ignore. They had mistaken her softness for weakness. They had mistaken her silence for surrender. They had mistaken her invisibility for emptiness. And by the time they finally saw Mara Voss clearly, it was already too late. The kitchen ghost had become the queen of the dark beneath the city. The portrait in Richard Hale's office had been watching Emma Reeves long before she knew it was her father. It hung behind a wall of glass and polished walnut, framed in dark bronze, lit from above by a soft museum light that made the man's face look almost alive. He was younger in the painting than he should have been, with kind eyes, wind-touched brown hair, and the quiet smile of someone who had once believed the future would be gentle. Emma had walked into that office expecting a routine interview, maybe a polite rejection, maybe a cold handshake from a billionaire who had forgotten how ordinary people breathed. Instead, she found herself staring at the dead man from her childhood, the man her mother said had vanished under black water when Emma was 4 years old. and the whole room seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Richard Hale was speaking when she first saw the portrait, but his voice faded into a faraway hum. The office around her was too bright, too clean, too expensive, with floor-to-ceiling windows showing the silver skyline of Seattle and the bay beyond it, where ferries moved like small white ghosts over the water. Emma stood near the conference table with her hands clasped around the strap of her worn leather bag, trying to look calm, trying not to seem impressed by the private elevator, the silent assistants, the glass walls, or the kind of quiet wealth that did not need to announce itself. Richard had been explaining something about the fellowship program at Hale Dynamics, a new initiative for people without traditional corporate backgrounds. Emma had applied on a dare from a friend and had not expected to get past the first online form. Yet here she was, wearing her best navy dress, her hair pinned back too tightly, her heart already beating too fast before the portrait stole the air from her lungs. She did not mean to interrupt him. The words simply fell out of her mouth. "Why do you have a picture of my father?" The room changed at once. Not loudly, not dramatically. There was no thunder, no crash, no gasp from the two executives seated near the table. But something sharper than sound passed through the office. Richard stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. His hand, which had been resting lightly on the back of a chair, tightened until his knuckles went pale. The woman from legal looked up from her tablet. The head of recruitment slowly turned toward the portrait, then back to Emma, as if trying to decide whether she had misunderstood something dangerous. Even the air conditioning seemed to quiet itself. Richard Hale was a man whose face appeared on magazine covers and business channels, always calm, always exact, always smiling with the controlled warmth of someone who could buy and sell whole neighborhoods without raising his voice. He was in his late 50s now, tall and silver-haired, with a lean frame, sharp blue eyes, and a kind of stillness that made people around him careful. Until that moment, Emma had thought his stillness was confidence. Now she realized it might have been restraint. He looked at her as if she had opened a door he had spent 20 years bracing shut. "What did you just say?" Richard asked. Emma swallowed. Her throat had gone dry. "That man in the portrait, that's Daniel Reeves. That's my father." The legal woman shifted in her chair. The recruitment director looked down, suddenly very interested in the edge of his folder. Richard did not move. His eyes flicked to the portrait, then back to Emma's face, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He looked at her hairline, her cheekbones, her mouth, her eyes. He was not being rude. He was searching for proof. Then he turned toward the others and spoke in a voice so quiet it landed like a command. "Leave us." Nobody questioned him. Chairs slid back. Tablets were gathered. Folders closed. The room emptied with a soft rush of expensive shoes over thick carpet. The doors shut with a low click, and Emma found herself alone with one of the richest men in the country and the painted face of a father she had mourned for most of her life. Richard walked to the windows and stood with his back to her. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Outside, a ferry cut across the water. Emma watched its wake open in two silver lines behind it, and had the strange thought that her own life had just split the same way. One path leading back to the story she had been told, the other into a place she could not yet see. "Your mother's name is Claire," Richard said at last. Emma's fingers tightened around her bag. "Yes." "You were born in spring." Her breath caught. "Yes." Richard turned slowly. The color had drained from his face. "And Daniel called you his little comet." Emma felt something break open inside her chest. Nobody had called her that in years. Her mother used to say it when Emma was small, usually with tears in her eyes, usually when she thought Emma was too young to understand the grief hiding behind the nickname. Little comet, always moving, always bright, always gone too fast. "How do you know that?" Emma whispered. Richard looked at the portrait again. His eyes were not cold now. They were wounded. Because Daniel Reeves was not just a man I knew. He was my closest friend. He was my first business partner, and if you are his daughter, then your life has been built on a lie almost as large as mine. Emma wanted to sit down, but her legs would not move. She stared at him, waiting for some explanation that would make the room normal again. There had to be one. Maybe Richard had known her father from a garage. Maybe Daniel had fixed his car. Maybe the portrait was a tribute to some small kindness long forgotten by everyone but the billionaire who owed him a favor. Emma's mother had always said Daniel Reeves was a mechanic with oil under his nails and a love for old engines, a quiet man who could hear what was wrong with a motor just by listening to it turn over. He had died in a boating accident on a grey morning when the lake was rough. There had been a storm. There had been no body. There had been grief so heavy it made her mother's hair go white at the temples before she turned 30. But Richard Hale was shaking his head before Emma could even ask. Daniel was not a mechanic, he said gently. At least not the way you were told. He could rebuild an engine, yes. He loved old cars. That part was true. But he was also one of the most brilliant engineers I ever met. Maybe the most brilliant. In 1996, he and I started this company in a rented warehouse with bad wiring, 2 folding desks, and a server that overheated every afternoon. I handled investors. Daniel built the impossible. Emma let out a small, broken laugh, not because anything was funny, but because her mind refused to accept the shape of what he was saying. No, my father worked at a repair shop. He worked there on weekends because he liked the owner, Richard said, and because Daniel never knew how to sit still. But Hale Dynamics began as Hale Reeves Systems. His name was on the first incorporation papers. His code was in the first product. His invention became the foundation beneath everything you see here. Emma looked past him at the office, at the city, at the shining symbol on the tower across from them. Hale Dynamics was everywhere. Phones, hospitals, satellites, financial systems, emergency networks. Its software moved data quickly and cleanly in places where seconds mattered and failure cost lives. Emma had grown up seeing the logo on buses and airport screens while her mother clipped coupons at the kitchen table. She had eaten powdered soup for dinner under a light that flickered because they could not afford to fix the wiring. She had watched her mother sell her wedding ring to cover a medical bill. And somewhere inside this shining empire, if Richard was telling the truth, was a piece of her father. What invention? She asked. Richard walked to the portrait and touched the lower edge of the frame with 2 fingers, almost like an apology. A compression algorithm for real-time data transfer. Daniel found a way to move enormous streams of information through weak networks without losing integrity. At the time, people thought it was clever. Then the world changed, and suddenly everything needed to move faster. Video, medical imaging, secure financial records, military communications. Daniel's work became the spine of this company. Emma's eyes burned. Then why didn't we have anything? Richard flinched as if she had struck him. It was a small movement, but Emma saw it. For the first time since she had entered the office, he looked less like a billionaire and more like an old man standing in front of a locked room full of ghosts. I don't know, he said. That is the part that has kept me awake for 6 months. Emma shook her head. 6 months? Richard crossed the room to his desk. He opened a drawer, removed a slim black folder, and placed it on the table between them. He did not open it right away. His hand rested on top of it, heavy and still. Daniel vanished in 2002, he said. That is what I know. He did not come to work. He did not answer calls. His car was found near the marina. Your mother said he had gone out on the water and never came back. There was no wreckage, no body, no real investigation. I hired private investigators. I pushed the police. I spent months chasing rumors until every trail ran into fog. Eventually, I accepted what everyone told me, that he was gone. Emma could hardly breathe. Her mother's version had always sounded sad, but solid. A storm, a boat, a widowed young mother, a closed case. A life divided into before and after. Now Richard was turning those memories over, one by one, and showing her the cracks beneath them. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. Richard opened the folder. Inside were letters. Not printed letters, not emails, not legal notices. Old-fashioned handwritten pages, each sealed in plastic, each covered in tight, careful script that made Emma's knees weaken. She knew that handwriting. She had seen it on the inside cover of a children's book her mother kept in a box under the bed. Daniel had written her name there when she was too young to read it. For Emma, my little comet. Love, Dad. Her hand moved toward the folder without permission, but stopped just above the pages, afraid to touch them, afraid they would turn to dust. "They began arriving 6 months ago," Richard said. "No return address, no fingerprints, no useful postmarks. Every letter signed with Daniel's name." Emma stared at the dark ink. "What do they say?" Richard hesitated. "They say he is alive." The world narrowed to a single point. Emma heard her own breathing turn thin and uneven. She heard the far-off sound of traffic far below the tower. She heard Richard say her name, but it came from a distance, as if he were calling from the other side of a wall. Alive. The word did not enter her gently. It tore through her. Daniel Reeves had not been a grave, or a story, or a fading photograph in the hallway. He had been somewhere, breathing, aging, hiding, while Emma learned to ride a bike without him, while she graduated high school with one empty chair in the crowd, while her mother cried alone in the laundry room with the dryer running to cover the sound. "No," Emma said, though she did not know which part she was denying. "No, that's not possible." "I thought the same thing," Richard said. "At first I believed it was extortion, a hoax. Someone trying to use my grief. But whoever wrote these letters knew things only Daniel would know. Project names we never wrote down, private jokes from the early days, mistakes in the first source code that no outsider ever saw. And then there was this." He pulled one page free and slid it toward her. Emma did not want to read it. She read it anyway. "Richard, if this reaches you, then either I am running out of time, or someone has finally decided the past is safe enough to disturb. They did not come for me because I was important. They came because the work was. The algorithm was never the prize. Control was. Follow the patent. Follow the royalties. Do not trust Graham." The name at the bottom was Daniel. Emma pressed a hand to her mouth. "Graham Cole?" she whispered, because everyone knew that name too. Graham Cole was a long-time executive at Hale Dynamics, a polished, gray-haired man who appeared beside Richard in shareholder meetings and charity events. He had the smooth look of a trusted uncle and the careful smile of someone who had never raised his voice in public. Richard's face hardened. "Yes, you think he did something to my father?" "I think Daniel wanted me to think that," Richard said, "and I think I was too slow to understand why." The door opened before Emma could answer. Not wide, not suddenly. Just enough for a man in a dark suit to step inside with the quiet confidence of someone who was used to entering rooms where secrets were already bleeding through the carpet. He was in his 40s, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped black hair, tired eyes, and the calm expression of a man who had seen too many lies die ugly deaths. Richard did not look surprised to see him. "Emma," Richard said, "this is Marcus Vale. He used to be a federal investigator. Now he handles private matters for me." Marcus gave her a respectful nod, not friendly, not cold. "Ms. Reeves." Emma looked from Marcus to Richard. "You already knew who I was before I walked in here." Richard's silence answered first. Then he said, "I knew your name. I did not know you were coming today until recruitment flagged your application last week. I told them to bring you in. I wanted to see if there was any chance you were Daniel's daughter. Why didn't you call me? Emma asked, anger rising through the shock now, hot and clean. Why bring me here like this? Why let me find out by staring at a painting? Richard looked down. Because if I was wrong, I would have dragged you into a nightmare for nothing. And if I was right, I needed to see your face when you saw his. That's cruel. Yes, Richard said softly. It was. The honesty disarmed her more than an excuse would have. Emma looked back at the portrait. The man in it seemed unchanged, calm and distant, while everything around him collapsed. She hated him for a second, not fairly, not fully, but the feeling came anyway. She hated him for being alive somewhere while her mother worked double shifts. She hated him for the birthdays missed, the father-daughter dances avoided, the empty side of every holiday table. Then grief moved beneath the anger, deeper and more dangerous, because if Daniel was alive, then every year she had spent mourning him had been both real and false. Marcus stepped closer to the table. Mr. Hale asked me to review the letters and the company records. The first thing I found was that Daniel Reeves retained ownership in a patent tied to the original compression architecture. 40%. Emma's head turned sharply. 40%? Marcus nodded. On paper, but the royalty path is buried. It looks like payments connected to Daniel's patent were redirected through a chain of holding companies for nearly 18 years. Richard's jaw tightened. I never saw those payments. Because you were not meant to, Marcus said. The final collection entity is called Archon Strategic Assets. Quiet little company, no real employees, no public profile worth anything, but it sits under several layers of trusts and offshore shells. Emma felt a cold thread move through her stomach. Who owns it? Marcus glanced at Richard, then back at her. I am still confirming the full trail, but the control signatures point toward Graham Cole. The name settled into the office like smoke. Emma turned to Richard. So my father invented the thing that made this company rich, then he disappeared, then someone collected his money for almost 20 years. That is what it looks like, Richard said. And you didn't know. The question was quiet, but it landed hard. Richard accepted it. He did not defend himself. He did not remind her how big the company was, how complicated the records were, how many lawyers and officers stood between him and every hidden transaction. He simply met her eyes. I should have known, he said. Emma looked away first. Her anger wanted someone to blame, and Richard was standing close enough to carry some of it. But there was shame in his face that did not look performed. There was fear too, not for himself, but for what else might be waiting beneath the polished floor of his company. What do you want from me? Emma asked. Richard's answer came slowly. I want your permission to keep looking. I want to show your mother the letters. I want to know whether Daniel is alive. And if he is, I want to bring him home. The words should have comforted her. Instead, they frightened her. Home sounded simple. Home sounded like a warm porch light, an unlocked door, a meal kept waiting. But Daniel had not come home in 20 years. Men did not disappear that long because they were embarrassed. They disappeared because something larger than shame was standing between them and the people they loved. Emma reached for one of the letters at last. The plastic sleeve was cool beneath her fingertips. Daniel's handwriting waited inside it, patient and impossible. My mother told me he died, she said. Every year, every time I asked, she told the same story. Marcus's expression softened a little. People lie for different reasons. Emma's eyes lifted to his. That is supposed to make me feel better. No, Marcus said. It is supposed to keep you careful. Richard closed the folder with gentle finality. You do not have to decide anything today. I can have a car take you home. Marcus can brief you tomorrow, or never, if that is what you choose. Emma almost laughed again. The idea of going home to her small apartment, making tea, and pretending this had been a strange meeting with a strange rich man was absurd. Her old life was still there, but it already felt like a room she had stepped out of and could not re-enter. The portrait had seen to that. So had the letters. So had the name Graham Cole sitting at the center of the story like a locked door. She looked at Richard. "Does Graham know about me?" Richard did not answer quickly enough. Marcus did. "Not yet, as far as we can tell. But he has people inside the company. If he learns you were here, he may start asking questions." Emma felt the soft fear then. Not panic, not yet. Just a quiet opening under her ribs, a sense that the ground beneath her was not solid, and maybe never had been. She thought of her mother, Claire, alone in the little house outside Tacoma, watering plants on the porch, keeping secrets behind tired eyes. She thought of Daniel somewhere in the dark, writing letters by hand, still remembering enough to send them back into the world. She thought of Graham Cole smiling for cameras while hidden money moved through silent accounts. Outside the windows, the bay darkened as clouds covered the sun. The city turned steel gray. The portrait light clicked on automatically, brightening Daniel's painted face. Emma straightened. She did not feel brave. She felt confused, angry, and hollowed out. But beneath all of that was something harder, something her mother had once called stubbornness, and her teachers had called focus. If her father was alive, she needed to know. If he was dead, she needed the truth. And if someone had stolen not only his work, but his life, then the lie had already lasted long enough. "I want copies of everything," she said. Richard nodded once. "You'll have them. And I want to see my mother tonight." Marcus's eyes sharpened. "Then we should move carefully." Emma looked at him. "Why?" Before Marcus could answer, Richard's desk phone lit up without ringing. A small red icon flashed on the screen. Richard stared at it, and the little remaining color in his face vanished. Marcus crossed the room in 2 fast steps. "What is it?" Richard touched the screen. A security feed opened on the glass wall beside the portrait. The image showed the private hallway outside the office. At first it was empty. Then a man appeared near the elevator, walking slowly, one hand in the pocket of his charcoal coat, his face turned toward the camera, as if he knew exactly where it was. Graham Cole. Emma recognized him immediately from interviews, annual reports, and the framed photographs in the lobby. He looked exactly as he always did, calm, polished, pleasant. But on the screen, standing outside Richard's office without an appointment, his smile seemed thinner than it should have been. Richard's voice dropped to a whisper. He was supposed to be in London. Graham looked straight into the camera and smiled wider, as if he could see them watching from the other side. Emma's fingers closed around the edge of the table. The portrait of Daniel Reeves glowed behind her, silent and waiting, while the man who may have stolen his life stood just beyond the door. The private hallway outside Richard Hale's office had gone so still that even the camera feed seemed to hold its breath. Graham Cole stood beneath the pale ceiling lights with his charcoal coat buttoned neatly, his silver hair combed back, and that calm public smile resting on his face, like a mask made for charity dinners and shareholder meetings. He should have been an ocean away. He should have been in London, shaking hands with investors and pretending to care about clean energy panels and quarterly projections. Instead, he was standing 10 feet from Richard's door, smiling into the security camera as if he had heard every word spoken inside. Emma felt Marcus shift beside her before she heard him move. He was suddenly between her and the door, one hand near the inside of his jacket. Richard did not move at all. His eyes were fixed on the screen, and for one strange second, Emma saw the young man he must have been once, the man who had trusted his friends, built a company from borrowed desks and bad wiring, and believed that genius would be enough to protect the people who carried it. Then the billionaire returned. Richard's face hardened into something smooth and cold. "Do not open that door," Marcus said. Richard did not look at him. If I don't, he will know we're afraid. He already knows enough to come here, Marcus said. That is not the same as letting him in. On the screen, Graham lifted one hand and knocked gently. 3 soft taps. Polite, patient, almost friendly. The sound traveled through the office door and into Emma's bones. It did not sound like danger. That was what frightened her most. Danger in stories slammed through windows and shouted threats. Graham Cole knocked like a neighbor returning a borrowed tool. Richard pressed a button on his desk. Graham. The speaker carried Graham's voice into the office, warm and faintly amused. Richard. I heard you were conducting an unusual interview today. I thought I would stop by and say hello. Emma's stomach tightened. Richard's eyes flicked toward her for less than a second, but it was enough. Graham knew she was there. I'm busy, Richard said. So I gathered. Graham stepped closer to the camera, and his smile softened in a way that made Emma colder. I would hate to interrupt anything personal, especially after all these years. Richard's hand closed slowly into a fist. Marcus leaned toward the desk microphone, his voice flat. Mr. Cole, the executive floor is restricted without clearance. Graham gave a small laugh. Marcus Vale, of course. Richard, you really are making this dramatic. Former federal men, locked doors, private files. Anyone would think we were hiding bodies. Nobody spoke. Graham's smile faded by a fraction. Let me in, Richard. No, Richard said. The answer was simple, but something in it changed the hallway. Graham's pleasant expression did not fall away. It only sharpened. He looked past the camera, past the door, as if he could see Emma standing there with her heart banging against her ribs and Daniel's handwriting still burning in her memory. Then give my regards to Miss Reeves, Graham said softly. She has her father's eyes. The screen went black. For a moment, Emma did not understand what had happened. Then alarms began to pulse silently in the glass wall, red warnings blooming across Richard's security system. Marcus cursed under his breath and pulled out his phone. Richard moved to the desk, but before he could touch the control panel, every light in the office flickered once, then steadied with a different tone. The room did not go dark. It went trapped. The private elevator display turned red. The office doors locked from the outside with a clean metallic click. Marcus was already speaking into his phone. Lock down the north garage. Find Cole. No one leaves the building. Richard stared at the dead camera feed. He was watching the internal network. He still is, Marcus said. We need to move her. Emma looked from one man to the other. Move me where? Before anyone could answer, Richard's personal phone buzzed on the desk. The screen showed an unknown number. Richard looked at it, and something old and frightened moved across his face. He answered on speaker. There was silence first, then a thin crackle of distance, then a man's voice, weak but unmistakably alive. Richard, the voice said. Get Emma out of that building. Emma stopped breathing. Richard gripped the edge of the desk. Daniel? Emma made a sound she could not control, half gasp, half sob. The office disappeared for a moment. There was only that voice, worn down by years and static, but somehow familiar, in a place deeper than memory. She had no real memory of her father speaking. She had only home videos, old recordings, the echo of a laugh her mother once played until the tape wore thin. But her body knew him before her mind could argue. Dad? She whispered. There was a sharp breath on the line. Emma. One word. Her name. That was all it took. The anger, grief, confusion and fear inside her twisted together so tightly she had to grab the table to stay upright. Daniel's voice broke. My little comet. Emma closed her eyes as tears spilled over. Richard looked away, his jaw trembling. Marcus did not soften. He was already at the wall panel, trying to force the emergency override. Daniel, where are you? Richard asked. Tell us where you are. No time, Daniel said. Graham found the cabin. He found the letters. I thought I covered the trail, but he found it. Marcus turned sharply. What cabin? Sierra foothills, Daniel said. His breathing sounded rough, as if he were moving while speaking. North of Pine Hollow, old fire road. The deed is under Archon. Graham used the money he stole from me to hide the place, then forgot it could hide me too. Emma wiped at her face with shaking fingers. Why didn't you come home? The silence that followed hurt more than any answer. When Daniel spoke again, his voice was softer. Because he promised he would kill you both. Emma pressed her hand to her mouth. He showed me pictures of you in preschool, Daniel said. Pictures of Claire leaving work. He knew where you slept. He knew who watched you when your mother had night shifts. He said if I ever came forward, if I ever called, if I ever tried to prove what he did, you and your mother would vanish before I reached a courthouse. Richard whispered. Daniel, I didn't know. I know, Daniel said. That was the point. He made sure I had no one I could reach. I should have been braver. I should have found a way. Emma wanted to scream at him. She wanted to tell him that birthdays had passed, that her mother had aged under the weight of the lie, that being protected from grief did not make grief disappear. But she heard the fear in his voice, and beneath it, something worse, a kind of shame that had been eating him alive for 20 years. Marcus stepped closer to the phone. Daniel, listen to me. Is Graham with you now? No, but someone is coming. I saw headlights through the trees. The office door suddenly unlocked. No alarm, no warning, just another clean click. Marcus raised his hand, telling everyone to stay back. The door opened an inch, pushed by someone outside, and a phone slid through the gap onto the carpet. The door closed again. Marcus picked it up carefully. The screen was already playing a video. Emma saw her mother. Claire Reeves was sitting in her kitchen, tied to one of the old wooden chairs Emma had eaten breakfast in for half her childhood. Her grey-streaked hair was loose around her face. Her eyes were frightened but dry. A man in a dark jacket stood behind her with one hand on her shoulder. A text message appeared beneath the video. No police, no board, no press. Bring Emma to the south garage. Emma's knees nearly gave out. Richard caught her arm, but she pulled away from him with a broken sound. That's my mother. Marcus stared at the video, his expression becoming very still. He split the threat. Daniel at the cabin, Claire at home, Emma here. He wants everyone isolated. Richard looked at him. Can you get a team to Claire? Marcus was already typing. I have people closer to Tacoma than Graham knows, but we need to keep him talking and make him believe Emma is moving where he wants. Emma shook her head. No, I'm not bait. Marcus looked at her. You already are. The only question is whether we let him control the hook. The fear inside Emma changed shape. It did not leave. It became clearer. Graham had spent 20 years teaching everyone around him to move through his maze. Her father had hidden inside it. Her mother had lied inside it. Richard had built a shining company while poison threaded the walls. Emma had walked into the center of it by accident, but she was not a child in a photograph anymore. She picked up Daniel's letter from the table and looked at the final line again. Follow the patent. Follow the royalties. Do not trust Graham. Then she looked at Richard. Can you still access the company's public broadcast system? Richard blinked. Yes. Marcus frowned. Emma. He wants silence, she said. Her voice shook, but it held. That's how he survived this long. My father stayed silent. My mother stayed silent. Richard stayed confused. Everyone signed documents and closed files, and trusted the nice man with the clean smile. So stop keeping it quiet. Richard understood first. A slow, painful light entered his eyes. Marcus shook his head. If we go public before law enforcement is positioned, Graham may panic. He already kidnapped my mother, Emma said. He is already going to my father. Panic is not new. The only thing new is that people might finally know where to look. Richard turned to Marcus. Send everything to your contacts. The letters, the patent records, the Archon trail, the county clerk transfer, all of it. Marcus stared at him. Once you do this, there is no taking it back. Shareholders, regulators, press, lawsuits, criminal inquiry. Your company will bleed. Richard looked at Daniel's portrait. It should have bled 20 years ago. Within minutes, the office became something else. Not a prison, a command center. Richard bypassed Graham's lockout using an old analog access line Daniel himself had built into the first Hale Reeves servers. A forgotten emergency path no modern executive had bothered to remove because no one alive understood its purpose. Marcus sent files to federal contacts, local police near Claire's house, and a retired marshal near Pine Hollow. Emma stood beside Richard as the camera light on his desk turned green. When Richard Hale appeared on every internal screen in the company, he did not look like a man protecting his empire. He looked like a man finally setting it down. "My name is Richard Hale," he began, his voice quiet but steady. "For more than 20 years, this company has told an incomplete story about its beginning. That ends today." Emma listened as he spoke Daniel's name. Not as a footnote, not as an old employee, as co-founder, as inventor, as the mind behind the technology that built Hale Dynamics. Richard described the letters, the hidden royalties, the Archon shell companies, and the evidence pointing toward Graham Cole. He did not soften his own failure. He did not hide behind lawyers. He said he had been blind. He said Daniel Reeves had been erased. He said the company would cooperate with law enforcement immediately. By the time he finished, the building below them was no longer quiet. Through the glass walls, Emma saw employees gathering around screens. Phones lit up. People stood from desks. The secret left the office, spilled through servers, crossed floors, moved into messages, recordings and calls. Graham had spent 2 decades controlling the story. Richard had just handed it to thousands of people at once. Marcus looked at his phone. "My team reached your mother's house." Emma gripped the table. "And?" He listened, his face unreadable. Then his shoulders lowered a fraction. "She's alive." Shaken, but alive. The man holding her ran when the broadcast hit. They have him. Emma bent forward as a sob tore through her. Richard touched her back gently, then seemed to remember he had no right to comfort her, and pulled his hand away. Marcus was still listening. "The Pine Hollow unit is 10 minutes from the cabin. Daniel is not answering now." Emma looked up. "Then we go." Richard did not argue. Maybe once he would have. Maybe a man with that much power was used to sending others into danger, while he stayed above it. But this was Daniel. This was the friend he had lost, the partner he had failed, the ghost whose portrait had watched him grow rich. Richard only nodded. They left through a service corridor Marcus trusted more than the private elevator. By the time they reached the garage, police sirens were beginning to echo around the tower. Reporters would come soon. Lawyers would come. Board members would call. The polished world Graham had hidden inside was cracking open behind them, but Emma did not look back. The flight to the Sierra foothills felt unreal. Richard's private jet cut through the evening sky while Emma sat near the window, Daniel's letters in her lap, her mother's voice still fresh in her ear from the brief, trembling call Marcus had allowed. Claire had cried when she heard Daniel was alive. Then she had gone silent for a long time and said only, "Bring him home if he'll come. Not if he's safe. Not if he still loves us. If he'll come." That was when Emma understood that her mother's heart had not been fooled by the lie. It had been standing guard over it. Night had fallen by the time they reached Pine Hollow. Marcus drove the last stretch himself, taking the old fire road through tall black pines that leaned over the headlights like listening witnesses. The road was narrow and rough, washed with old rain, and every turn seemed to pull them deeper into a place the world had forgotten. Richard sat in the front passenger seat, silent. Emma sat behind him, watching the trees flicker past, feeling each mile tighten around her chest. They saw the cabin before they reached it. A small square of yellow light glowed between the trunks. Then another light moved across it. Headlights. A dark SUV was parked near the porch. Marcus killed their headlights and stopped the car behind a screen of trees. "Stay here." Emma opened her door. Marcus turned. "Emma." "No," she whispered. "I have stayed outside this story my whole life." She expected him to argue. He only studied her for a second, then handed her a small flashlight. "Behind me. No sudden moves." The cabin smelled of pine smoke, damp earth, and old wood. As they approached, voices carried through the thin walls. One was Graham's, smooth even now. The other was older, rougher, and shaking with anger. "You lost, Graham," Daniel said. "It's already out." Graham laughed softly. "You still think truth wins because it deserves to. That was always your weakness." Marcus moved to the side window. Richard stepped onto the porch with Emma close behind him. Through the glass, she saw Graham standing near a table covered with notebooks and old radio parts. His coat was open now. His perfect hair had come loose at the temple. In his right hand was a gun, held low but ready. Across from him stood Daniel Reeves. He was not the man in the portrait. That was Emma's first foolish thought. This man was thinner, older, with a grey beard, hollow cheeks, and shoulders bent by years of hiding. His hair had gone almost white. His sweater hung loosely on him, but his eyes were the same, kind, bright, unbearably sad. Emma made a sound at the window. Daniel turned. The whole world stopped. Graham turned too, and Richard kicked the door open before the gun could rise. Everything happened quickly after that, though later Emma would remember it slowly. Marcus came through the side door with his weapon drawn. Graham grabbed Daniel by the arm, shouting legal threats that no longer sounded powerful. Richard stepped into the cabin and said Graham's name with so much disgust that it seemed to fill the small room. Graham pointed the gun toward Emma for half a second, and Daniel moved in front of her without thinking, the way a father moves before memory, before fear, before time. Marcus fired once. The shot cracked through the cabin. Graham screamed as the gun flew from his hand and hit the floor. Then it was over. Not really over. Men like Graham did not end in one clean moment. He was still shouting when Marcus forced him to the ground. He shouted about the company, about markets, about how Daniel would have ruined everything by giving the technology away, by trusting the wrong people, by failing to understand what his invention was worth. He said Richard would have lost control. He said someone had to protect the future. He said genius was useless without men willing to make hard choices. Richard looked down at him with a grief so cold it no longer resembled grief. "You did not protect the future," he said. "You stole a life and called it strategy." Graham looked at Emma then, and for the first time, the mask truly cracked. There was hate under it. Not wild hate. Small hate. Bitter hate. The kind that had lived too long in expensive rooms. "You have no idea what your father cost us," Graham said. Emma stepped closer, trembling from head to toe. Daniel reached for her, then stopped himself, as if he did not know whether he had the right. "No," Emma said to Graham. "You have no idea what you cost us." Police lights began to flash through the trees. Red and blue washed over the cabin walls, over Daniel's notebooks, over Richard's pale face, over Graham Cole lying on the floor with his hands pinned behind his back. Marcus went outside to meet the officers. Richard followed after one last look at Daniel, giving father and daughter the privacy that 20 years had stolen from them. Emma and Daniel stood in the ruined quiet. Up close, he seemed fragile, not weak, never weak, but worn thin by survival. His hands shook as he lifted them, then let them fall. Emma saw ink stains on his fingers, burn scars near one wrist, a small notebook sticking out of his sweater pocket, bent and softened from being handled too often. "I don't know how to do this," Daniel said. Emma laughed through her tears. "Good. Neither do I." He looked at her, as if every year he had missed was passing across her face at once. "You were so small when I left." "I grew." "I know." His voice broke. He pulled the notebook from his pocket and held it out. "I wrote it down. Every birthday. Every year. I guessed what you might like, what you might be afraid of, what you might become. I know it doesn't count. I know it doesn't fix anything." Emma took the notebook. Its cover was soft and frayed. Inside, page after page carried dates, small memories, imagined letters never sent. On her 8th birthday, he had wondered if she still liked pancakes. On her 12th, he had hoped someone taught her how to fix a bike chain. On her 18th, the writing blurred in places where tears had touched the ink. Emma pressed the notebook to her chest. "No," she said. "It doesn't fix it." Daniel closed his eyes. "But it matters," she whispered. He opened them. The space between them was only a few feet. It held 20 years of silence, fear, anger, birthdays, lies, and love that had not known where to go. Emma crossed it slowly. Daniel did not reach for her until she reached first. Then his arms came around her with a broken sound, and he held her like someone afraid the world might take her again if he loosened his grip. Emma cried against his shoulder, not neatly, not beautifully. She cried like the little girl who had waited for a father who never came home, and the grown woman who understood at last that his absence had been both a wound and a sacrifice. Daniel cried too, whispering apologies into her hair until the words lost shape. The story did not heal that night. It only turned toward healing. Graham Cole was arrested before dawn. By morning, the world knew enough to start asking questions, and once the questions began, they did not stop. Marcus's evidence opened doors Graham had spent years sealing shut. Archon's strategic assets was exposed. The hidden royalty trail came apart, one shell company at a time. The payment to the county clerk surfaced, along with the memo discussing Daniel's ownership if he became unavailable. Former employees came forward. Old files reappeared. Men who had smiled beside Graham at board dinners suddenly remembered meetings, signatures, and warnings they had once convinced themselves meant nothing. Daniel's patent ownership was validated after a long legal fight, but the truth had already reached further than any courtroom. Richard stood before employees, cameras, investors, and the Reeves family, and corrected the founding history of Hale Dynamics. He said Daniel's name clearly. He said Claire's name too. He said Emma's family had paid the price for a company that had benefited from stolen silence. He did not ask forgiveness in public. He only promised restitution, cooperation, and a permanent place for Daniel Reeves in the story that should never have erased him. Daniel did not move back into life all at once. He returned quietly with Emma to the small house where Claire still lived. The first dinner was awkward and tender and almost unbearable. Claire stood in the kitchen doorway for a long time before she touched him. When she finally did, she slapped him once. Not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to release 20 years of fear. Then she collapsed into his arms and sobbed until he could barely hold himself upright. Emma watched them from the table, understanding that love did not return like a light switched on. It came back like a damaged bird, cautious and trembling, unsure if the room was safe. There were hard conversations after that. Some ended in tears, some ended in silence. Emma asked why Daniel had not found another way. Claire admitted how much she had known and how much she had guessed. Daniel told them about the threats, the private investigators he had avoided, the years he had almost come home and turned back at the last moment because a strange car sat too long near the house. No answer was enough, but some answers were true, and truth gave them a place to begin. Months later, Richard invited Emma back to the tower, not to the same office as before, though the portrait was still there. This time the room felt different, less like a shrine to what had been hidden, more like a place where something unfinished had been placed in the light. Richard offered Emma a position at Hale Dynamics, working with the ethics and historical restitution team that had formed after the investigation. Emma almost refused before he finished speaking. "I don't want charity," she said. Richard nodded. "I wouldn't insult you with it. I don't want to be hired because of my father." "You aren't," Richard said. "You are being offered the role because you walked into this building with no power, saw a lie everyone else had learned to ignore, and refused to look away. Companies need people like that more than they need people like me." Emma looked toward the portrait. Daniel had refused to come that day. Crowds still made him nervous. Cameras were worse, but he had told Emma to go, and Claire had packed her lunch as if Emma were still 16, slipping a note into the bag that simply said, "Take what is yours." Emma accepted. A week later, when she entered Richard's office as an employee instead of a confused visitor, she saw that a new photograph had been placed beside the old portrait. It was not polished or dramatic, just a simple picture taken in Claire's backyard on a cloudy afternoon. Daniel stood in the middle, older and thinner than the painted man behind Richard's desk, but smiling for real. Richard stood on one side of him, not like a billionaire, not like a founder, but like an old friend grateful to be allowed back into the frame. Emma stood on the other side, her hand wrapped around her father's arm, her chin lifted, her eyes bright with the strange, steady courage of someone who had lost the story of her life and then helped write it again. For a long moment, she only looked at the two images together. The portrait showed the man the world had forgotten. The photograph showed the truth that had survived anyway. Emma touched the edge of the frame with one finger, just as Richard once had. Her father's legacy had been restored. Her mother's silence had finally ended. Graham's beautiful lie had collapsed under the weight of ordinary stubborn truth. And Emma Reeves, who had entered that office as a woman searching for a job, stepped into her future knowing that no locked room, no hidden account, no powerful man with a polished smile would ever again decide what her family's story was allowed to be. The portrait no longer watched her like a ghost. It watched her like a beginning. The woman trembling behind O'Connell's diner did not belong in that alley. Everything about her was wrong for a place like that. The rain had soaked her silver hair flat against her face. Her expensive cream coat was stained with dirty water. One pearl earring still clung to her ear, while the other was gone. She stood between a rusted dumpster and a brick wall covered in old posters, shivering so hard her whole body seemed to shake with the wind. In any other part of Chicago, someone might have stopped and wondered who she was. In this alley, on a freezing late October night, most people would have looked away. But Harper Quinn had spent too much of her life being looked past to ever do that to someone else. The diner kitchen door groaned open behind her, spilling warm yellow light into the dark. Harper stepped outside with a black trash bag in one hand and a tired ache deep in her feet. She had been on her shift for almost 12 hours, smiling at rude customers, refilling coffee for men who snapped their fingers at her, and pretending not to hear the cook make jokes about how she never seemed to turn down a staff meal. Her uniform shirt pulled tight across her soft stomach. Her black pants were damp at the hems from spilled mop water. Her cheeks were flushed from the heat of the grill, and her curls were frizzed from steam and rain. She was 30 years old, plus size, exhausted, and used to being treated like furniture. Useful when needed, invisible when not. At first, she thought the shape in the alley was a pile of wet cardboard. Then it moved. Harper froze with the trash bag still in her hand. The older woman lifted her head slowly, and even through the darkness, Harper could see the fear in her eyes. It was not the wild fear of someone drunk or angry. It was worse than that. It was the fear of someone who knew something terrible was coming and had nowhere left to run. "Ma," Harper called softly. The woman flinched, her thin hand pressed against the brick wall as if the world had tilted under her feet. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was faint, polished, and broken by cold. "Do not call them. Harper looked toward the mouth of the alley, where rain blurred the passing headlights on the street. Call who? The woman swallowed, and her hand moved to her chest. Her fingers trembled against a gold brooch shaped like a rose. Anyone. That answer made Harper's stomach tighten. Chicago at night was never fully quiet, but the alley suddenly felt too still. The diner fans hummed behind her. Somewhere far off, a siren cried and faded. Harper should have gone back inside. She should have told her boss. She should have called the police or an ambulance and let someone else handle it. That was what a smarter woman would have done. That was what a woman with savings, support, and a clean way out would have done. But the older woman swayed. Harper dropped the trash bag and rushed forward just as the woman's knees gave out. She caught her awkwardly, taking most of the woman's weight against her own body. The older woman was cold, far too cold, and shaking under Harper's hands. "Oh my God," Harper breathed. "You're freezing." The woman tried to push away, but she had no strength left. "I cannot go to a hospital." "You might not get a vote on that," Harper said, trying to keep her voice calm even though her heart was pounding. "You're soaked through. Are you hurt?" "No hospital," the woman said again. This time there was panic under the words. "Please, they will find me." Harper looked at her more closely. The coat was not just nice. It was the kind of coat Harper had only seen on women who came into the diner by accident after charity events downtown. Her shoes were Italian leather, ruined now by puddles and alley mud. Her hands were soft, with neatly shaped nails and a wedding ring that looked old, heavy, and very real. This woman was not homeless. She was not just lost. She was someone important who had ended up in a place where important people were not supposed to bleed, shiver, or beg strangers for help. "What's your name?" Harper asked. The woman blinked like the question had to travel a long way to reach her. "Isabella." "Okay, Isabella." Harper slipped off her own coat, a cheap brown one with a broken zipper, and wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. The cold bit through Harper's diner shirt immediately, but she ignored it. "I'm Harper. I'm going to get you somewhere warm." "No police," Isabella whispered. "I heard you. No hospital." "I heard that too." Isabella gripped Harper's wrist with surprising force. "Promise me." Harper stared down at that pale hand on her skin. She had been promised very little in her life, and she knew promises could be dangerous things. Still, there was something in Isabella's eyes that stripped the choice right out of her. "I promise I won't call anyone unless you stop breathing," Harper said. "But if you do that, I'm breaking the promise." For the first time, the older woman gave the smallest hint of a smile. Then her eyes rolled back. Harper nearly cursed loud enough for the whole block to hear. Instead, she pulled Isabella closer, braced her feet on the wet pavement, and half carried, half dragged her toward the back lot. Her old blue Chevy sat under a broken security light, looking every bit as tired as Harper felt. The passenger door stuck because of course it did, and Harper had to kick it twice before it opened. She eased Isabella inside, tucked the coat tighter around her, and ran back to grab her purse from the staff hooks inside the diner. Her boss, Ronnie, glanced up from the register. He was chewing gum with his mouth open, his gray hair slicked back with too much gel. "Where do you think you're going? You've still got side work." "There's a woman sick outside," Harper said, grabbing her bag. Ronnie looked her up and down, his mouth twisting. "So call somebody. I'm taking her somewhere safe. You leave now. Don't bother coming in tomorrow." Harper stopped with her hand on the door. That threat should have scared her. Rent was due in 9 days. Her fridge had eggs, half a block of cheese, and a bottle of ketchup inside it. Her bank account was a sad little joke waiting to happen. But outside, Isabella was shaking in her car, and the fear in that woman's eyes had not been fake. Harper looked back at Ronnie. "Then I guess you'll have to refill your own coffee." She stepped into the rain before he could answer. The drive to Harper's apartment felt longer than it was. Isabella drifted in and out of awareness, mumbling words Harper could not understand. Twice she looked through the rear window with sharp terror, as if expecting headlights to appear behind them. Harper kept both hands tight on the wheel and took side streets instead of the main road, even though she told herself she was being ridiculous. Nobody was following them. This was not a movie. She was a diner waitress with a dying woman in her passenger seat and a car that made a sad grinding sound every time she turned left. If danger was coming, it had probably chosen a better car to chase. Still, she kept checking the mirror. Her apartment was on the second floor of a tired brick building in Avondale, above a closed laundromat that still smelled faintly of detergent and wet concrete. The stairs were narrow, and getting Isabella up them nearly broke Harper's back, but she managed. She got the older woman inside, locked the door, and turned every lamp on, because the room felt less frightening with light in it. The apartment was small, warm, and deeply ordinary. A sagging couch faced a thrift store coffee table. A stack of library books sat beside a mug with chipped blue paint. The kitchen was barely big enough for one person to turn around in. Harper suddenly saw it through Isabella's eyes and felt a deep, hot embarrassment. The cheap curtains, the peeling paint near the window, the laundry basket she had not folded. The size of her life laid bare in one little room. Then Isabella coughed, and Harper forgot to be ashamed. She helped her out of the ruined coat and wet shoes. The dress underneath was dark green silk, soaked and clinging to her frail body. Harper wrapped her in towels, then blankets, then the old quilt her grandmother had made before arthritis stole the strength from her hands. She made tea, found dry socks, and filled a bowl with warm water. Isabella tried to thank her, but the words kept fading. When Harper helped her take the wet scarf from around her neck, she saw the medical bracelet. Heart condition. The words were printed beside a name that made Harper pause, Isabella Rossi. For a moment, Harper did not move. The name sat in the air like a match held too close to gasoline. Rossi was not just a last name in Chicago. Rossi meant whispers, closed restaurants, black cars outside churches, men in perfect suits who did not wait in lines. Harper had heard customers lower their voices when they said it. She had watched cops at the diner go quiet when someone mentioned Matthew Rossi, the man who had taken over his father's empire and turned fear into a business language. Harper looked at Isabella's pale face. "No," she whispered to herself. "Absolutely not." Isabella's breathing hitched. Harper grabbed her phone and searched the medication listed on the bracelet. The first few results made her skin go cold. Isabella needed pills. Not soon. Not tomorrow now. Harper checked the older woman's small purse and found nothing but a soaked handkerchief, a broken phone, a lipstick, and a photo of a young boy with dark eyes standing beside a man in a black suit. There was no medicine. Harper paced once across the room, then twice. She had $47 in her checking account. Payday was 3 days away. Her credit card was nearly maxed out because her car needed repairs and because life had a cruel sense of humor. She looked at Isabella, who was now curled under the quilt with her lips turning faintly blue. "Okay," Harper said, mostly to keep herself from falling apart. "Okay, we're doing this." The all-night pharmacy was 6 blocks away. Harper left Isabella wrapped in blankets with a space heater angled near the couch and ran through the rain so hard her lungs burned. At the pharmacy counter, she explained too fast, begged too openly, and handed over almost everything she had for a small emergency supply of pills after the tired pharmacist took pity on her. By the time Harper got home, her hair was dripping, her shoes were soaked through, and her chest felt tight from the cold. But Isabella was still breathing. Harper gave her the medicine with careful hands. She sat beside her on the couch until the worst of the shaking passed. Sometime after 3 in the morning, Isabella opened her eyes and looked at her with a strange, soft sadness. "You should not have helped me," she whispered. Harper gave a tired laugh. "People keep saying that like I had a meeting about it first. They will come." "Who?" "My son." Harper's smile faded. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "He will not understand." Outside, thunder rolled low over the city. Harper wanted to ask more, but Isabella had already slipped back into restless sleep. So Harper sat on the floor with her back against the couch, wrapped in a thin blanket, watching the rain stripe the window. She should have been terrified. Maybe she was. But there was something else too, something quiet and strange. For the first time in a long time, she felt like her life had cracked open and let something impossible inside. Morning arrived gray and cold. Harper woke to the sound of boots in the hallway. At first she thought she had dreamed it. Then the footsteps stopped outside her door. Her whole body went still. A hard knock shook the frame. Harper pushed herself up, heart punching against her ribs. Isabella stirred on the couch, her face still pale but no longer deathly white. The knock came again, heavier this time. "Open the door." A man's voice, low and controlled, passed through the wood. Harper did not move. The lock exploded inward. The door slammed open so violently it hit the wall and cracked the plaster. 3 men in black coats entered first, all broad shoulders and hard faces, moving with the quiet confidence of men who expected the world to get out of their way. Then he stepped in behind them, Matthew Rossi. Harper knew it without anyone saying his name. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal overcoat that looked too expensive to touch, his black hair neat despite the rain shining on his shoulders. His face was calm in a way that made Harper's blood turn cold. Not angry, not wild, calm, like every violent thing he had ever done had been done with a steady hand and a clear mind. His eyes moved over the room once, taking in the blankets, the medicine bottle, the broken phone on the table, and finally Isabella on the couch. Then his gaze landed on Harper. It was like being pinned to the wall without a hand touching her. "Who are you?" he asked. Harper's mouth went dry. "Harper Quinn." One of the men moved toward Isabella, but Matthew lifted one hand. The man stopped instantly. Matthew walked closer to Harper, slow and silent. She backed up until her hip hit the kitchen counter. She hated herself for the fear rising in her throat, but she could not stop it. This was not a rude customer. This was not Ronnie yelling about side work. This was the kind of man danger obeyed. "You had my mother in your apartment all night," he said. "She was sick. You expect me to believe you found Isabella Rossi in an alley and brought her home out of kindness?" That's what happened. His expression did not change, but the air did. It grew heavier, colder, harder to breathe. "People do not touch my family by accident," Matthew said. "They do not hide my mother in a rented apartment, buy medicine, and wait quietly for morning. I didn't hide her." Harper's voice shook, and she hated that too. "She begged me not to call anyone." His eyes sharpened. "So you knew who she was?" "Not at first, but you found out." Harper glanced at the medical bracelet on the coffee table. "I saw her name, and then you kept her here. I kept her alive." For the first time, something flickered in Matthew's face. It was gone almost instantly, buried under that smooth, terrifying control. One of his men picked up Harper's purse from the chair and emptied it onto the table. Harper gasped and stepped forward, but another man blocked her path. Her keys, receipts, lip balm and pharmacy slips scattered across the wood. Matthew picked up the receipt and read it. His eyes paused on the total, then on the card number, then on Harper's name. "You spent your own money," he said quietly. "I didn't exactly have time to start a fundraiser." His gaze lifted to hers. There was a dangerous pause, and Harper wondered if her mouth had finally doomed her. Fear did strange things to her. Sometimes it made her quiet. Sometimes it made her stupidly honest. Matthew stepped closer. "Did someone send you?" "No." "Did you call anyone?" "No." "Did you take pictures of her?" "No." "Did you ask her for money?" Harper stared at him, anger finally pushing through the fear. "She was half dead in an alley. What kind of person do you think I am?" "The kind I meet every day," he said. Grelever, desperate. That word hit too close. Desperate. Harper was desperate. Desperate for rent, for rest, for one day where her body was not treated like a public problem, for a life that did not feel like it was always one bill away from collapse. But she had not helped Isabella because of money. She had helped her because no one else was there. Her eyes burned. "I know I don't look like much to you. I know this place doesn't look like much. But I didn't hurt her. I didn't use her. I gave her my coat. I bought her medicine. I sat up all night making sure she kept breathing. So if you came here looking for someone to punish, you picked the wrong woman." The room went silent. Matthew stared at her. Behind him, Isabella stirred. Her eyes opened slowly. "Matteo." The name left her lips with such tenderness that every man in the room changed. Matthew turned at once, and all that cold power cracked for half a second. He crossed to the couch and knelt beside her, taking her fragile hand in both of his. "Mama." he said, and his voice was no longer the voice of Chicago's most feared man. It was the voice of a son who had almost lost the only soft thing left in his world. Isabella touched his face. "Do not frighten her." Matthew's jaw tightened. "I thought she took you." "No." Isabella's tired eyes moved to Harper. "She saved me." Harper stood frozen near the kitchen, still breathing too fast. Isabella squeezed Matthew's hand. "She gave me her coat. She brought me here. She spent what little she had on medicine. She asked for nothing." Her voice weakened, but she forced the words out. "You will not harm her." Matthew closed his eyes. For a long moment, no one moved. When he opened them again, he looked back at Harper. Something had changed. He was still terrifying, still controlled, still a man made of secrets and blood. But now there was confusion in his gaze, and that somehow made him more dangerous. He looked at her like she was a language he did not know how to read. "In my world," he said, slowly, "kindness is never free." Harper wrapped her arms around herself. "Maybe that's why your world is so miserable." One of his men made a small sound like he had swallowed wrong. Matthew did not look away from Harper. Isabella smiled faintly from the couch. "I like her." Matthew rose to his full height. Harper had to tilt her head back to keep eye contact. She expected another threat. Maybe an order. Maybe money tossed at her feet like she was something that could be cleaned up and dismissed. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. He placed it on the coffee table beside the medicine bottle. "For the door," he said. "The lock, the damage, the trouble. I don't want your money. You will take it." "No, I won't." His eyes narrowed slightly. Harper knew she should stop. She knew arguing with a man like Matthew Rossi was probably a very short road to regret. But she was tired, cold, broke, insulted, and still standing in the same damp uniform from yesterday. Matthew studied her for another long second. Then, to her surprise, he took the envelope back, removed a smaller amount of cash, and set that on the table instead. "For the door," he said. Nothing else. That was somehow worse. The fact that he had listened. Harper looked away first. His men helped Isabella carefully from the couch and wrapped her in a long black coat one of them had brought. Isabella held Harper's hand before leaving. "You have a good heart," she whispered. Harper swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat. "You scared me half to death. I am sorry. Don't do it again." Isabella's smile warmed for one brief second. "I will try." Matthew watched the exchange with a strange expression. Then his mother was guided toward the broken door, and the apartment began to empty of dark coats, heavy boots, and quiet danger. Matthew paused at the threshold. "Do not speak about this," he said. Harper gave a tired nod. "Trust me, I don't want to be connected to whatever this is." His gaze moved over her face, not quickly, not rudely, but with unsettling focus, like he was memorizing something he had not meant to notice. "You already are," he said. Then he left. The silence after him felt enormous. Harper stood in the middle of her apartment, staring at the ruined door, the damp towels, the quilt on the couch, and the money on the table. Her hands began to shake only after everyone was gone. She sank onto the couch and laughed once, soft and humorless, because crying felt too obvious and screaming would bother the neighbors. By noon, a man she had never seen before came to fix her door. He did not ask for payment. By evening, Ronnie called and told her there had been a misunderstanding, and of course she still had her job. His voice shook the whole time. The next morning, the landlord slipped a note under her door saying her rent would not be raised after all. At the diner, customers who usually talked down to her suddenly said, "Please and thank you." A man who had once snapped his fingers for more coffee lowered his eyes when Harper came near. That was when she saw the first black car. It sat across the street from O'Connell's with its engine running and its windows too dark to see through. Harper told herself it was nothing. Then it was there again after her shift. Then again outside her apartment. Then beside the bus stop. Always far enough away to pretend it was not following her. Always close enough to remind her that pretending did not make it true. Matthew Rossi had walked out of her apartment, but he had not walked out of her life. And as Harper stood under the weak glow of the diner sign on another cold Chicago night, Watching that black car wait in the rain, she understood the soft, terrible truth settling over her bones. She had saved the wrong woman, or maybe, somehow, the right one. The black car waited in the rain like a quiet warning. Harper stood beneath the weak red glow of O'Connell's Diner's sign, her purse hugged against her chest, the smell of coffee and fried onions still clinging to her uniform. Across the street, the tinted windows reflected nothing but streaks of water and passing headlights. She could not see the driver. She could not see anyone inside. But she knew, deep in the nervous place beneath her ribs, that someone inside was watching her. Not staring the way men at the diner sometimes stared when they thought she would not notice. Not judging her body or her tired face, or the way her shoes pinched after a long shift. This was different. This was the steady attention of people who had been ordered not to blink. Harper told herself to walk home like normal. She told herself not to look afraid. But every step down the sidewalk felt heavy, and the city around her felt changed. The same corner store buzzed with fluorescent light. The same old man smoked outside the pawn shop. The same train rattled in the distance, shaking the wet pavement under her feet. Yet everything had a shadow now. Every parked car looked like it might hold a gun. Every man in a dark coat seemed to turn his head a little too slowly. By the time she reached her apartment, Harper's hands were stiff with cold and worry. The black car rolled past once, slow and silent, then disappeared around the block. For 3 days the protection followed her like a ghost. At first, Harper tried to ignore it. Then she tried to outrun it, taking side streets, switching bus stops, leaving work through the back alley. It did not matter. There was always a car. Always a man across the street pretending to check his phone. Always the strange feeling that the city had wrapped invisible wire around her life. People treated her differently, too. Ronnie stopped yelling. Customers stopped snapping their fingers. A woman who had laughed at Harper's uniform last week suddenly called her sweetheart and tipped $20 on a coffee. It would have been funny if it did not make Harper want to crawl out of her own skin. She lasted until Friday night. The diner was nearly empty, with only 2 truck drivers at the counter and a young couple sharing pancakes in the corner booth. Rain tapped against the windows, softer than before, almost polite. Harper was wiping down a table when Ronnie came out of the office looking pale. He held the phone away from his ear like it had bitten him. "For you," he said. Harper frowned. "Who is it?" Ronnie swallowed. "Just take it." She took the phone slowly. "Hello?" Matthew Rossi's voice came through low and calm. "Go into the kitchen now." The cloth slipped from Harper's hand. She looked toward the front window. Across the street, the black car was gone. "What?" "Do not argue with me, Harper. Walk into the kitchen and get away from the windows." A cold pressure closed around her chest. "Why?" The bell above the diner door jingled. 2 men stepped inside. They were not regulars. Harper knew that immediately. They were too still, too focused. One wore a baseball cap low over his face. The other kept one hand tucked inside his jacket. Their eyes moved over the room, passed over the truck drivers, skipped Ronnie, and landed on Harper. Matthew's voice sharpened. "Harper." She dropped the phone and ran. The first gunshot shattered the front window. Screams tore through the diner. Glass exploded across the floor like ice. Harper slipped near the kitchen door, caught herself on the counter, and threw herself behind the steel prep table just as another shot punched through the wall where her head had been. The cook shouted something. Ronnie fell flat behind the register. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, bitter and unreal. Then the back door burst open. Men in black flooded the kitchen, moving fast and hard. Harper barely had time to gasp before one of them grabbed her around the waist and pulled her behind him. She fought on instinct, kicking and twisting until he said, "Rossi sent us." That did not make her calmer. It only made the nightmare clearer. The sounds in the diner became sharp and broken. A shout, a crash, a heavy thud, the deep bark of orders. Harper crouched on the greasy kitchen floor with her hands over her ears, her whole body shaking so violently she thought she might be sick. She had not done anything. She had not stolen from anyone. She had not lied or betrayed or asked to matter. She had helped a sick woman in an alley and somehow that small kindness had opened a door into a world where people bled over breakfast menus and men with guns knew her name. A familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Where is she, Matthew?" Harper lifted her head. He came through the kitchen doorway like a storm dressed in black. His coat was open, rain shining on his shoulders, his face colder than she had ever seen it. One of his men spoke to him, but Matthew ignored him. His eyes found Harper on the floor, and for one brief second the terrifying calm in him cracked. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and crouched in front of her. "Are you hit?" he asked. Harper stared at him. "Am I hit? Answer me." "No." Her voice broke. "No, I'm not hit, but someone shot at me in a diner, Matthew." His jaw tightened when she said his name, like hearing it from her mouth affected him in a way he did not want to admit. "They were Morelli men. A rival family. They found out you helped my mother." "I helped your mother. I didn't join your war, I know." "No, you don't know." Harper pushed herself up, anger rising through the fear, because anger was easier to stand on. "You put men on me. You scared my boss. You changed things around me like I was some problem you could manage. And now people are shooting through windows because of you." Matthew stood with her, close enough that she could see rain on his lashes. "Because of me, you are alive. Because of you, I had to be saved in the first place." The kitchen went silent around them. No one spoke to Matthew Rossi like that. Harper could feel every man in the room waiting for his reaction. But Matthew did not shout. He did not threaten her. He simply looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Then he said, "You are coming with me." "No." "Yes, no, Matthew. You do not get to break into my life and start making choices for me." His voice dropped. "If I leave you here, they will come again, and next time they will not miss." Harper wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him he was wrong. But the shattered front window glittered across the tile. The truck drivers were still shaking. Ronnie was crying behind the counter. The bullet hole in the wall near the kitchen door sat at the exact height of Harper's face. Matthew saw her look at it. His voice softened just slightly. "I am not asking because I want control. I am asking because if you die because of my family, my mother will never forgive me." Harper let out a bitter little laugh. "So this is about Isabella." His eyes did not move from hers, at first. The words landed between them, quiet and dangerous. Harper looked away first. Matthew took off his coat and placed it around her shoulders before she could stop him. It was warm from his body, heavy and expensive and dark with rain. Harper hated that her fingers closed around the edges of it. She hated even more that part of her wanted to lean into the warmth. The ride to the Rossi estate was silent. Harper sat in the back of an armored car with Matthew beside her and 2 men in front. Chicago slitted past in wet streaks of light, then faded into quieter streets and gated roads. The city seemed to fall away, leaving only the hum of the engine and the steady pressure of Matthew's presence beside her. He did not touch her. He did not try to explain. He only watched the road ahead like he could threaten the future into behaving. The estate rose out of the darkness behind iron gates and stone walls, huge and pale under the rain. Harper stared through the window as the car rolled up a long driveway lined with bare trees. The house looked less like a home and more like a secret that had learned how to stand still. Marble steps, tall windows, guards at every entrance, warm light behind thick glass. It was beautiful in the way a locked jewelry case was beautiful. Safe for what was inside. Impossible for anything else. Harper stepped out of the car and immediately felt out of place. Her diner shoes squeaked against the marble floor. Her uniform smelled like grease, smoke, and fear. A maid with silver hair glanced at her, then quickly looked away. A man near the staircase looked her over with the kind of silent judgment Harper knew too well. Too big, too ordinary, too soft for a world this polished and cruel. Matthew saw it. His voice cut across the foyer. "Anyone who makes her feel unwelcome answers to me." The room went still. Harper's cheeks burned. "I don't need you to threaten people into being nice to me." "No," Matthew said, looking at the man near the stairs until he lowered his eyes. "You deserve it without the threat, but I know my house." Before Harper could answer, Isabella appeared at the top of the staircase. She looked fragile but far better than the night in the alley. Her silver hair was brushed neatly. A soft blue shawl covered her shoulders. When she saw Harper, her face warmed with real joy, and that warmth did what all the marble and guards could not. It made the house feel almost human. "My brave girl," Isabella said. Harper's throat tightened. "You look better. Because of you." Isabella came down slowly, with Matthew moving toward her at once, but she waved him off with a mother's impatience. She reached Harper and took both of her hands. "I asked him to bring you where you would be safe." Harper glanced at Matthew. "He has a funny way of asking." Isabella smiled. "My son has many flaws. Being gentle with fear is one of them." Matthew looked away, but not fast enough to hide the flicker of pain in his expression. That first night in the estate felt endless. Harper was shown to a bedroom larger than her entire apartment, with cream walls, thick rugs, and a bed so soft she sat on the edge of it like it might reject her. Someone brought clothes in her size, not shapeless or ugly, but warm sweaters, dark pants, soft sleepwear, all new. That made her uncomfortable in a way she could not explain. She was used to making do, not being considered. She was used to squeezing herself into things that almost fit and pretending it did not hurt. She did not sleep much. Over the next few days, the golden cage became harder to hate, not because Harper forgave Matthew for dragging her there, but because Isabella made it impossible to stay completely angry. The older woman asked Harper to join her for tea, then for lunch, then for slow walks through the glass garden room where rain slid down the windows and winter roses bloomed under warm lamps. Isabella told stories about Chicago before Harper was born, about arriving from Italy as a young bride, about loving a dangerous man and raising a son who learned too young that love was something enemies could use against you. Matthew was not born cold, Isabella said one afternoon, her voice soft over the clink of china. He became cold because warmth kept being taken from him. Harper watched rain bead on the glass ceiling. That doesn't give him the right to control everyone. No, Isabella said. It only explains why he tries. Matthew remained distant at first. He came and went at strange hours. Sometimes Harper saw him through open doors, speaking quietly with men who looked afraid to breathe wrong. Sometimes he joined dinner and said very little, though his eyes followed Harper whenever she reached for a glass or laughed at something Isabella said. It should have made her uncomfortable. It did make her uncomfortable. But beneath it was another feeling, one Harper did not want to name. He looked at her as if she mattered, not because she was thin, not because she was polished, not because she knew how to move through his world with practiced grace. He watched her argue with him about locking the garden doors. He watched her bring Isabella an extra blanket without being asked. He watched her tell one of his guards to stop hovering because Isabella was a grown woman, not a museum vase. And each time his expression shifted a little more, as if Harper kept surprising him simply by refusing to be small. One evening, Harper found him alone in the library, standing near the fireplace with a glass he had not touched. The room smelled like old books, smoke, and rain. She should have turned around. Instead, she stepped inside. "Your mother fell asleep early," she said. "I know. Of course you know. There are probably 3 men outside her door listening to her breathe." His mouth almost curved. Almost. 2. Harper folded her arms. "That was not an invitation to be proud of yourself." Matthew looked into the fire. "You think I am a monster? I think you are a man who learned to survive by becoming one." He turned then, and the honesty in his face startled her more than the coldness ever had. "There is no clean way to hold power in my world. Maybe not. But there are still choices. You say that like choices are easy." "No," Harper said quietly. "I say that because they're hard." Something passed between them then, a quiet thread pulled tight. Matthew looked at her diner-worn hands, her soft body wrapped in a borrowed sweater, her tired eyes that still refused to lower for him. He stepped closer, not enough to trap her, just enough for the firelight to touch both their faces. "You saved my mother when you had every reason not to get involved," he said. "You spent money you needed. You gave her your coat in the rain." "Why?" Harper shrugged, but the movement felt too small for the question. "Because she was cold." "That is not an answer. It's the only one I have." Harper looked up at him. Not everything is strategy, Matthew. Sometimes someone is hurting and you help. His gaze moved over her face slowly. In my life, that kind of softness gets people killed. Harper's voice softened too. Then, maybe you've been calling it softness because you don't know what courage looks like when it isn't holding a gun. The fire snapped. Matthew stared at her like she had touched a wound he kept hidden under his ribs. Then he reached out, slowly enough for her to pull away. She did not. His fingers brushed a loose curl back from her cheek. The touch was careful, almost uncertain, and that made her breath catch. "You should be afraid of me," he whispered. "I am." His hand stilled. Harper swallowed. But not only afraid, the words changed something. Matthew leaned closer, his eyes dropping to her mouth, then lifting again as if asking a question he did not know how to say. Harper could have stepped back. She should have. Instead, she stayed. His lips touched hers gently at first, almost impossibly gentle for a man like him. Then the restraint broke. The kiss deepened, slow and consuming, filled with all the things neither of them knew how to speak. Harper's hands rose to his chest, feeling the hard beat of his heart under her palms. For once, she did not wonder if she was too much. In Matthew's arms, she felt like something solid in a world built on lies. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. "You are not a weakness," he said, voice rough. "Do you understand me?" Harper closed her eyes. "I'm not sure I understand anything anymore. The attack came 2 nights later. It began with the lights going out. One moment, the estate glowed with warm gold lamps and quiet order. The next, darkness swallowed the halls. A second later, alarms screamed through the house. Harper had been in Isabella's sitting room, helping her choose a scarf. When the windows shook with the distant sound of gunfire, Isabella went pale. Harper's blood turned cold. "Stay here." "No, Harper. Lock the door." She did not wait for an answer. The hallway outside was chaos. Guards ran past her. Red emergency lights flashed against marble walls. Somewhere below, men shouted. Harper moved on instinct, staying low, her bare feet silent against the rug. She did not know where Matthew was, only that every part of her needed to find him. At the top of the main staircase, she saw him. Matthew was in the foyer below, one hand pressed to his side, blood dark between his fingers. 2 of his men were down, another fought near the doors, and beside Matthew stood Victor, the quiet security chief Harper had seen every day since arriving. The man who checked the gates, the man who nodded politely at Isabella, the man Matthew trusted. Victor raised his gun toward Matthew's head. Harper did not think. For 30 years, the world had told her her body was something to hide, something to shrink, something to apologize for. It had told her she was too heavy, too wide, too much. In that one blazing second, all the old shame burned into something fierce and bright. She ran down the stairs. Victor turned at the sound, but not fast enough. Harper hit him with everything she had. Her shoulder slammed into his chest. Her weight drove him backward. The gun fired into the ceiling as they crashed into a marble table, sending a vase exploding across the floor. Pain flashed through Harper's side, but she held on, grabbing his arm, twisting with a desperate strength she did not know she had. Victor cursed and shoved her, but Harper planted her feet and drove her knee into his stomach. He stumbled. Matthew moved. The sound that followed was short and final. Victor dropped to the floor. The gun slid across the marble and stopped near Harper's hand. Silence fell in pieces, broken only by the alarm and Harper's ragged breathing. Matthew stood a few feet away, pale from blood loss, staring at her like the whole world had shifted under him. "You saved me," he said. Harper's hands shook. "You're bleeding. You saved me. Matthew, you are bleeding." His men rushed in then, and the estate came alive again. Orders flew. The remaining attackers were taken down. The gates were sealed. Isabella appeared at the staircase despite everyone's attempts to keep her away, her hand pressed to her mouth as she saw Harper standing barefoot in the ruined foyer, glass around her feet, blood on her sweater, and Matthew still alive because of her. By morning, the rival family was finished. Harper did not ask for details. She did not want them. She only knew that the estate had gone quiet again, not peaceful but safe. Matthew survived the gunshot. The doctor stitched him in his private study while he refused pain medicine and kept his eyes on Harper the entire time. Isabella cried when she hugged her. One of the guards, a man who had barely looked at Harper all week, lowered his head when she passed. Respect, Harper realized, felt nothing like attention. Attention could still be cruel. Respect had weight. It made space around her, but when the danger passed, fear of a different kind moved in. 3 days after the attack, Harper packed the clothes she had arrived in. Her diner uniform had been washed and folded by someone in the house. The sight of it on the bed made her chest ache. That was her real life. Coffee stains, tired feet, rent notices, a world that had overlooked her, yes, but a world she understood. Matthew's world had marble floors and blood under them. It had devotion, but it also had enemies. It had Isabella's warmth, but it had locked gates too. She was zipping her small bag when Matthew appeared in the doorway. "You are leaving," he said. Harper did not turn around. "The danger is over." "No, the rival family is gone. Victor is dead. Your mother is safe. You're safe." "Harper," she closed her eyes at the sound of her name. "I don't belong here." Matthew stepped into the room slowly. "Who told you that?" She laughed softly, but it hurt. "Look around, I am." "No, Matthew. Really look. Women in your world look like they were made in expensive rooms. They know what fork to use and how to wear silk without feeling like a fraud. I'm a waitress from a diner with one good bra and a car that barely starts. I don't know how to be whatever this is." He came closer. "I do not want whatever this is. I want you." For now. His expression hardened, but not with anger, with pain. "You think I would go back to women who fear me, flatter me, and want my name on their credit cards after knowing you?" Harper's throat tightened. Matthew stopped in front of her. "You saved my mother before you knew who she was. You stood up to me in your kitchen when armed men surrounded you. You made my house warmer in 1 week than it has been in years. You saw the ugliest parts of my world and still ran toward danger when I was about to die. My trained men failed. My trusted guard betrayed me. You did not." Harper looked down. "That doesn't make me a queen." Matthew touched her chin, lifting her face gently. "No, it means you already were one. I was simply too blind to know what I was looking at." Her eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. "I'm scared, I know. I'm scared I'll lose myself here. Then I will spend the rest of my life making sure you do not." His voice lowered. "Stay because you choose it. Not because I demand it. Not because danger forced you here. Stay because this house is better with you in it. Because my mother loves you. Because I love you." The words settled over the room like dawn. Harper stared at him. Matthew Rossi, the man Chicago feared, looked more vulnerable in that moment than he had when bleeding in the foyer. "You love me?" she whispered. "Yes, you barely know how to ask for toast without sounding like a threat." His mouth curved faintly. "I will work on that." A laugh broke through her tears. It was small, shaky, and real. Matthew pulled her close, carefully because of his wound, and Harper let herself lean into him. Not because she had no other choice. Not because she had been rescued, but because for the first time staying did not feel like shrinking. It felt like stepping forward. Weeks later, Harper returned to O'Connell's diner one last time. Not in her old uniform, but in a deep green coat Isabella had chosen for her and boots that did not hurt her feet. Matthew waited outside in the car because Harper had insisted on going in alone. Ronnie nearly dropped a plate when he saw her. The regulars went quiet. The same counter, the same coffee smell, the same cracked red stools. But Harper did not feel invisible anymore. She picked up her final paycheck, said goodbye to the cook, and left Ronnie with a look that made him apologize without being asked. Outside, Matthew opened the car door for her. Across the street, the winter sun broke through the clouds, pale and cold over Chicago. Isabella waited at the estate with tea, a warm smile, and a place set for Harper at the family table. Not at the edge, not hidden near the kitchen, beside Matthew. Over time, people in the city learned her name. Some called her the waitress who saved Isabella Rossi. Some called her Matthew's weakness. They only made that mistake once. The people closest to the Rossi family knew better. Harper was not a weakness. She was the quiet force that had walked out of the rain and changed the heart of a house built on fear. She did not become cruel. She did not become polished into someone unrecognizable. She still laughed too loudly at Isabella's stories. She still carried snacks in her purse. She still believed kindness mattered, even in a world that punished it. But now, when she entered a room, no one looked past her. Matthew would watch from beside her, proud and silent, as men twice her size lowered their eyes with respect. Isabella would smile like she had known all along. And Harper, who had once believed her body made her invisible, finally understood the truth. She had never been too much. She had been powerful enough to take up space in a world that wanted her small. She had saved a mother, broken a traitor, challenged a don, and taught the most feared man in Chicago that love did not have to be a weakness. It could be the one thing strong enough to save him. And on cold nights, when rain tapped against the tall windows of the Rossi estate, Harper sometimes thought back to that alley behind O'Connell's diner. She remembered the shivering woman in the ruined cream coat. She remembered the choice that had changed everything. She had believed she was saving a stranger. But in the end, Isabella had found her too. The invisible waitress was gone. In her place stood Harper Quinn, the woman who walked into danger with a borrowed coat, a brave heart, and nothing to prove to anyone. And beside Matthew Rossi, with Isabella's hand proudly resting over hers, she claimed her place not as a rescued woman, not as a prisoner in a golden cage, but as the queen who had chosen her throne. The woman nobody thought worthy of a Mafia king's name was the only person in the room who saw the knife before it was raised, not the guards standing by the marble pillars, not the rich relatives dressed in black silk and old money, not the rival bosses smiling into their champagne like wolves pretending to be guests. Only Vera Belmont, the soft-bodied kitchen woman they had whispered about all night, noticed the servant's hand tremble as he passed behind Cassian Wolfe with a silver tray and murder hidden under a folded white cloth. For one breath, the grand ballroom seemed to hold still. The candles burned low, the music softened. The city's most dangerous man stood beneath a chandelier shaped like frozen rain, unaware that betrayal was moving toward his back. And Vera, who had spent her whole life being told to stay quiet, stood up. Long before anyone in the underworld learned her name, Vera Belmont belonged to the warm back room of a small neighborhood restaurant with fogged windows, cracked green tiles, and a kitchen door that never closed all the way. The restaurant was called Maribel's, though Maribel herself had been gone for almost 12 years, leaving behind a tired sign, a loyal cook, and a place where people came when they had nowhere else to go. Vera worked behind the kitchen, not in the shining front where customers could see the red checkered tablecloths and framed photographs on the wall, but in the narrow room near the pantry where the heat from the ovens wrapped around her like an old blanket. She made stews thick enough to last a family 3 days. She packed foil trays for widows who pretended they were buying for guests. She slipped extra rolls into bags for construction workers, whose hands shook from hunger, but whose pride would not let them ask. Children from the block came in after school with coins and shy eyes, and Vera always found a way to turn $2 into a bowl of soup, a piece of bread, and something sweet tucked beneath a napkin. Everyone knew she was kind. Some people even knew she was smart. But most people noticed only her body first, and her heart much later, if they bothered to notice it at all. Vera was fat, in a world that made fat women feel like they were taking up borrowed space. She had soft arms, round cheeks, heavy hips, and a belly she had spent too many years trying to hide beneath dark aprons and loose sweaters. Strangers looked past her until they wanted something. Women at the market called her plain with soft smiles that were sharper than knives. Men who came through the restaurant lowered their voices when she passed, as if cruelty became harmless when spoken quietly. Even the people who liked her often used words that sounded gentle but landed heavy. Sweet girl, big girl, simple girl. Good enough for the kitchen maybe, but not for the room where decisions were made. Vera learned early that invisible people heard everything. They heard who owed money, who was afraid, who lied about being happy, who came in wearing expensive shoes but paid with shaking fingers. Vera listened while she chopped onions, stirred sauce, folded napkins, and wiped tables no one else wanted to clean. She remembered names. She remembered patterns. She remembered which men stopped laughing when a certain black car rolled slowly down the street. She knew the city had shadows, and she knew those shadows had owners. The largest shadow belonged to Cassian Wolf. People said his name differently from other names. They did not say it loudly. They let it fall from their mouths like something hot. Cassian Wolf was the head of the Wolf family, the most feared crime empire in the city, though nobody ever called it that in public. In public, he owned warehouses, clubs, construction companies, private security firms, and half the expensive restaurants where politicians pretended not to meet criminals. In private, he controlled the docks, the judges who looked away, the men who collected debts before dawn, and the kind of silence that followed a person forever. Vera first saw him on a rainy Thursday night, when the restaurant was almost closed, and the street outside shone black beneath the lamps. The front door opened without the bell ringing. That was the first strange thing. The second strange thing was how every person in the dining room stopped moving. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The old man at the counter lowered his coffee cup without drinking. Even Tomas, the owner's nephew who thought he was brave because he had tattoos on both hands, stepped backward so quickly he bumped into the register. Cassian Wolf entered like the weather had followed him inside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a charcoal overcoat darkened at the collar by rain. His black hair was combed back from a face that looked carved from cold stone, beautiful in the way winter was beautiful before it killed the crops. His eyes were pale gray, almost silver under the weak yellow lights, and they moved across the room without hurry. Nobody spoke. Nobody had to. Fear had already introduced him. Behind him stood two men in dark suits, silent and watchful. One carried an umbrella he had clearly forgotten to close. Water dripped from its edge and spread across the floor in a shining puddle. Tomas stared at the puddle instead of Cassian's face. That was how frightened men behaved around Cassian Wolf. They watched the floor and prayed not to be noticed. Vera noticed something else. Cassian was bleeding. Not much. A thin line of red had slipped from beneath his cuff and touched the back of his hand. He kept that hand still at his side, hidden in the shadow of his coat, but Vera had spent years watching people pretend they were not hurt. She knew the small stiffness of pain. She knew the way a person breathed when they were holding themselves together by force. Tomas hurried forward with a pale face. "Mr. Wolf, we're honored. We can clear any table you want." Cassian's eyes passed over him and settled on the empty booth in the back corner. "Coffee," he said. His voice was quiet. That made it worse. Vera had expected thunder. Instead, he spoke like a man who knew thunder would come if he asked for it. Tomas nodded too many times. Of course, right away. He rushed toward the kitchen, nearly slipping on the wet floor. Vera caught the coffee pot before he could drop it. "I'll take it," she said. "No," Tomas whispered. "Are you crazy? He's bleeding." Tomas stared at her like she had slapped him. "Don't look at him. Don't talk to him. Just stay back here." But Vera had already taken a clean mug from the shelf. Something in her chest was beating too hard, not only from fear, but from a strange pull she did not understand. She poured the coffee, added nothing, then picked up a clean towel and a small first aid tin from under the sink. When she stepped into the dining room, every eye followed her, as if she were walking toward a wild animal with her hand open. Cassian sat alone in the booth. His men stood near the door. He did not look surprised when Vera approached, but his eyes sharpened. People usually lowered their gaze around him. Vera did not. She looked at his face, then at his hand. "You should clean that before it stains your cuff," she said. The room went so quiet, the rain outside sounded loud. One of his guards shifted, but Cassian lifted 2 fingers. The man stopped. Vera set the coffee down in front of him. Her hand was steady, though her heart was not. She placed the towel beside the mug and opened the little tin. It might sting. Cassian studied her for a long moment. You know who I am? Yes? And you're still standing here. You're bleeding in a restaurant. That makes you a customer with a cut. Something moved across his face. It was not a smile, not really, but the coldness changed shape. He held out his hand. Vera sat across from him without asking permission. A few people gasped softly behind her. She ignored them. Up close, Cassian Wolf smelled like rain, smoke, and expensive soap. The cut across his knuckles was deeper than she had thought. His hand was large, rougher than she expected, with old scars running pale beneath the fresh blood. She cleaned it carefully. He did not flinch. You work here, he said. I cook here. For the owner? For whoever needs to eat. His gaze rested on her face. Most men looked at Vera's body first, and her face second. Cassian did not do it that way. He looked as if he were reading something written beneath her skin. That sounds expensive, he said. Only if you think feeding people is a loss. For the first time, Cassian Wolf almost smiled. That was where the story should have ended. A strange night, a dangerous man, a woman too kind or too foolish to be afraid in the proper way. But Cassian came back the next week, and the week after that, always late, always when the restaurant was quiet. Sometimes he came with men, sometimes alone. He ordered coffee, then soup, then whatever Vera had cooked that day. He paid too much, and never asked for change. Vera noticed that he never wasted food. He ate slowly, as if he had once known hunger, and refused to disrespect a full plate. At first, people whispered because they were afraid. Then they whispered because they were curious. Cassian Wolf did not sit in small neighborhood restaurants. Cassian Wolf did not let kitchen women bring him coffee. Cassian Wolf did not listen while a fat girl in a flour-dusted apron talked about the price of onions, the city's broken shelters, or the old woman upstairs who needed heat before winter deepened. Yet there he was, night after night, silent and still, watching Vera like her ordinary words had become the only music in the room. Vera did not understand it. She understood hunger, rent, loneliness, and the math of stretching a pot of soup until everyone got some. She did not understand why a man who could buy entire streets listened when she spoke. She did not understand why his eyes softened when she placed a bowl in front of him, or why his jaw tightened when someone at the counter muttered something cruel about her size. She certainly did not understand why one evening, after a drunk man laughed and asked if Cassian needed a whole second table for his big kitchen sweetheart, Cassian simply turned his head and looked at him. He said nothing. The drunk man went pale, dropped cash on the counter, and left without his coat. Vera wiped her hands on her apron. You didn't have to scare him. I didn't threaten him. You looked at him. He understood me. That's still scaring him. Cassian leaned back in the booth, his gray eyes steady on hers. Would you rather I let him insult you? I'd rather it didn't bother me. It should bother you. Vera looked away, suddenly embarrassed by the heat rising in her cheeks. People say things. You get used to it. No, Cassian said softly. You learn to survive it. That isn't the same thing. Those words stayed with her longer than they should have. They followed her home through the cold streets. They sat beside her while she untied her shoes and rubbed the ache from her feet. They found her again in the morning while she stood in front of her small bathroom mirror, looking at the round face and tired eyes of a woman who had become very good at expecting little. You learn to survive it. That isn't the same thing. A month later, Cassian asked her to walk with him. It was late, and the restaurant had closed. The sidewalks were slick with rain, and the air smelled like wet brick and distant car exhaust. His men followed half a block behind them, quiet as shadows. Vera kept her hands tucked in the pockets of her coat, aware of every step, every car passing too slowly, every person who crossed the street when they saw Cassian coming. "You make everyone nervous," she said. "Yes. Doesn't that get lonely?" Cassian looked at her then. The street lamp caught the edge of his face, turning him half silver, half dark. "People are easier to control when they fear you." "That wasn't what I asked." "No," he said after a pause. "It was not." They walked another few steps. "Yes," he said, "it gets lonely." Vera did not know what to do with the honesty. It was too bare, too human, and it made him seem more dangerous somehow, because monsters were easier to understand when they stayed monsters. She looked down at the wet sidewalk. "Then stop making everyone afraid." "That simple?" "No, but most true things are simple before people make them impossible." He was quiet for so long she thought she had offended him. Then he laughed once, low and soft, and the sound moved through her like heat. 3 nights later, a black car stopped outside Maribel's before closing. An older woman stepped out, elegant and thin, wearing pearls at her throat and disapproval in every line of her face. She did not introduce herself. She did not have to. Her eyes had the same pale sharpness as Cassian's, but none of his stillness. She looked around the restaurant as if poverty were something contagious. "You are Vera Belmont," she said. Vera stood behind the counter with a towel in her hand. "Yes. I'm Celine Wolfe, Cassian's aunt." Vera's stomach tightened. "Would you like something to eat?" Celine's mouth curved. How charming. It was not a compliment. She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the old tile. "My nephew has always had strange habits. He enjoys quiet rooms, old books, and broken things. I assumed this little distraction would pass." Vera folded the towel slowly. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you are." Celine's gaze moved over Vera's body with polished cruelty. "Cassian is expected to marry soon. There are families whose daughters were raised for that kind of life. Beautiful girls, educated girls, women who know how to stand beside power without making it look ridiculous." The words landed where they were meant to land. Vera felt them sink deep, touching every old bruise inside her. But she had fed grieving mothers, angry men, scared children, and proud widows. She knew how to keep her voice calm when something hurt. "You should speak to Cassian about his choices," Vera said. "Not me." Celine's eyes narrowed. "Do not mistake his attention for devotion." Vera gave a small, tired smile. "I don't mistake anything for anything, Mrs. Wolfe. I work in a kitchen. I know the difference between heat and fire." For the first time, Celine looked unsettled. The next day, Cassian arrived before sunset. That alone was strange. He never came while the restaurant was full. But that evening, he entered in a black suit with no overcoat, his face unreadable, his men behind him. Conversations died one by one. Vera stood near the stove, stirring a pot of lentil soup, when Tomas rushed into the kitchen with wide eyes. "He's asking for you." Vera wiped her hands and stepped out. Cassian stood in the middle of the restaurant. He looked at no one else. "Come with me," he said. Vera frowned. "I'm working. I bought the restaurant." The room went silent. Tomas made a small choking sound. "You what?" Cassian did not look at him. "Maribel's now belongs to Vera Belmont. The staff will stay. The rent is paid for the next 10 years. The upstairs apartments have been purchased as well, and no tenant will be removed." Vera stared at him. "Cassian." He walked toward her, slow and certain. "My aunt came here." Vera's throat tightened. She was polite. "No." She was careful. "There is a difference. You didn't have to buy a building because someone insulted me." "I didn't." He stopped in front of her. His voice lowered until only she could hear. "I bought it because this place matters to you, and people who matter to me do not live at the mercy of landlords, relatives, or men who think kindness is weakness." Vera felt the whole room watching. She hated it. She hated the heat in her cheeks, the way her apron suddenly felt shabby, the way everyone could see a moment she did not know how to hold. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. Cassian's expression did not change, but something in his eyes opened. "The truth? Yes. I want you beside me." Vera's breath caught. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black velvet box. No one moved. No one breathed. Cassian Wolf, feared head of the city's darkest family, lowered himself onto one knee on the cracked tile floor of a neighborhood restaurant that smelled like soup, bread, and rain. The sound that went through the room was not a gasp. It was something stranger, something almost frightened. Vera looked down at him, frozen. His voice was calm, but his eyes were not. "I have been offered women with names old enough to open locked doors. I have been shown daughters raised to smile at men they do not love. I have been told what kind of wife makes an empire stronger." He opened the box. The ring inside was not delicate. It was an old diamond set in dark gold, deep and bright as captured lightning. "But I have never wanted a woman who measured her worth by what others could gain from her. I want the woman who feeds people when no one is watching. The woman who saw blood on my hand and treated me like a man instead of a weapon. The woman who tells me the truth when everyone else sells me obedience." Vera's eyes burned. Behind him, someone whispered, "This can't be real." Cassian's jaw tightened, but he did not turn. His gaze stayed on Vera. "Marry me." The sensible part of Vera should have said no. The frightened part certainly wanted to. She knew what he was. She knew he carried danger like other men carried keys. She knew his world would not welcome her. She knew women like her were not chosen in stories like his, unless the story planned to punish them for it. But Cassian was still on one knee. Cassian, who made killers lower their eyes. Cassian, who bought a restaurant not to own her, but to remove the hands that could hurt her. Cassian, who looked at her body without shame and her heart without pity. Vera swallowed hard. "People will laugh at you." His eyes darkened. "Let them. They'll say I'm not enough. They will be wrong. They'll say I made you weak." Cassian rose slowly, the ring still between them. "Then they have never understood strength." Vera looked at the ring, then at his face. Her hands were shaking when she held them out. "I don't know how to be a Mafia wife." Cassian slid the ring onto her finger with a care that nearly broke her. "Good," he said. "I have no use for one. I asked for you." The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the old Wolf estate at the edge of the city, where iron gates opened onto a road lined with bare winter trees. The house itself was enormous, grey stone and black windows, standing on the hill like it had been waiting for bad news for 100 years. Inside, chandeliers glittered over polished floors. White flowers climbed the staircases. Musicians played soft strings from a balcony. Every powerful family in the city came dressed in velvet, diamonds, and smiles sharp enough to cut glass. Vera wore ivory silk with long sleeves and a skirt that moved like water around her body. The dress had been made for her, not adjusted or stretched or apologized over. For one brief moment, when she looked in the mirror, she saw what Cassian seemed to see. A woman, soft, full, alive. Not a mistake, not a problem to solve, just herself, standing beneath gentle light. Then she heard the first whisper. "She's larger than I expected." Cassian must be proving a point. No, men like him do not marry points. There must be something else. Maybe she knows something. Maybe she trapped him. Poor Celine. Imagine explaining this to the families. Vera stood very still while the words gathered around her like cold smoke. Her bouquet trembled slightly in her hands. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that people were most satisfied when their cruelty drew blood, and she refused to give them the pleasure. Cassian found her before the ceremony in a quiet hallway lined with portraits of dead wolves. He was dressed in black, severe and breathtaking, his silver eyes colder than the winter light behind him. But when he saw Vera, the cold broke. "You look," he began, then stopped. Vera tried to smile. "Like a scandal?" His expression hardened. "Like mine." The word should have frightened her. From any other man it might have sounded like ownership. From Cassian it sounded like shelter. "They're whispering," she said. "I know. Aren't you angry?" "Yes." "You look calm." "I am deciding who will still be welcome in my house tomorrow." Vera stared at him. "Cassian, you can't remove everyone who insults me." "I can." "That isn't the answer." "No," he said softly, "but it is a start." She touched his sleeve. "Don't make today about punishment." Cassian looked down at her hand. His entire body seemed to still beneath that touch. "What should I make it about?" Vera took a breath. "Us. Just for today." Something in his face shifted, not into softness exactly, but into devotion so complete it frightened her more than anger. "Then today is yours." They were married beneath a ceiling painted with pale angels and storm clouds. Vera walked the aisle while the city's cruelest families watched. Some stared at her body, some looked at Cassian, waiting for embarrassment, regret, some signed that this was a private joke, carried too far. But Cassian did not look at them. He looked only at Vera. When she reached him, he took her hands like they were something sacred. His vows were short. Cassian was not a man who decorated truth. "I will stand between you and every harm I can reach. I will listen when others dismiss you. I will build you a life where you never have to shrink to be safe. And if the world insists on mistaking your kindness for weakness, I will enjoy watching you prove it wrong." Vera's voice shook when it was her turn, but it did not break. "I will not pretend you are gentle when you are not. I will not call darkness light just because I love the man standing inside it. But I will remember that even feared men can be lonely, and even dangerous men can choose better if someone gives them a reason. I will be honest with you. I will be kind when I can, and when I cannot be kind, I will still try to be just." The room did not know what to do with that. Cassian did. He kissed her slowly, in front of every person who had doubted her, with one hand steady at her waist, and the other cradling her face, like she was the only thing in the world that could still save him. For a while, Vera tried to believe love would be enough to quiet the house. It was not. The Wolf estate was full of people who smiled when Cassian watched, and turned cruel when he did not. His relatives praised Vera's dress, then wondered aloud whether the seamstress had needed extra fabric shipped in. His advisors spoke slowly to her, as if poverty had made her foolish. The wives of allied bosses invited her to tea, only to discuss diets, beauty clinics, and the importance of presentation when standing beside powerful men. Servants who had worked for the family for years went silent when Vera entered a room, then resumed whispering as soon as they thought she was gone. Vera did not complain, not at first. She had lived with judgment too long to be surprised by it. She found comfort in the kitchen, as she always had. The Wolf estate kitchen was enormous, all white stone, shining copper pans, and knives arranged with military precision. The chef looked horrified the first time Vera asked for an apron. By the end of the week, he was asking her opinion on broth. By the end of the month, the younger maids came to her when they were hungry, frightened, or homesick. That was how Vera began to hear things. A driver mentioned a shipment that had changed routes twice in 1 week. A maid cried because a man named Malric had threatened her brother over a debt that did not exist. A gardener joked that the Westgate cameras always failed on the same nights Cassian's cousin visited. A young guard, barely 20, came into the kitchen with a shaking hand and said he had been transferred off-dock duty without explanation, even though he had worked those routes for years. The name Malric appeared again and again, always lightly, always passing through conversation like smoke. Malric Wolf was Cassian's cousin, tall, charming, and golden-haired in a family of dark wolves. Everyone said he was loyal. Everyone said he made people comfortable in ways Cassian never could. He laughed easily, kissed his aunt's cheek, remembered birthdays, and always stood beside Cassian at public events with the relaxed confidence of a man who wanted nothing. But Vera noticed that the servants grew stiff around him. She noticed that guards stopped talking when his name entered a room. She noticed that Cassian's older advisors relaxed when Malric spoke, as if they preferred a smiling snake to a silent king. One evening, 3 months after the wedding, Vera sat in the kitchen after midnight with a cup of tea, cooling between her hands. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The house slept above her, or pretended to. Cassian had not come home yet. Another shipment had vanished near the river. Another ally had withdrawn from a meeting without explanation. Another ledger had gone missing from a locked office. The Empire was bleeding from places no one could see. Vera heard voices in the hallway beyond the pantry. "Cassian thinks it's the Eastern cruise," one man said. "Let him," another replied. "By the banquet it won't matter." Vera went still. The first voice lowered. "And the wife?" A soft laugh answered. "What about her? She hears recipes, not plans." The footsteps faded. Vera sat there for a long moment, breathing carefully, her hands wrapped around the cooling tea. She did not feel powerful. She felt afraid. But beneath the fear, something older and steadier opened its eyes. People had ignored her all her life. They had spoken over her, around her, through her. They had mistaken silence for emptiness and kindness for weakness. And now, inside the most dangerous house in the city, that same old mistake had become the only weapon she had. When Cassian came home just before dawn, his coat wet from rain and his face carved with exhaustion, Vera was waiting in his study. On his desk, arranged in neat rows, were delivery times, servant schedules, gate logs, charity guest lists, and 3 names circled in blue ink. Cassian stopped in the doorway. Vera looked up at him, her soft face pale but calm. "There is something wrong inside your family," she said. "And I think I know where it starts." Cassian did not move for several seconds. Rainwater slid from the edge of his black coat and fell onto the study floor in quiet drops, one after another, like a clock counting down to something neither of them could stop. His eyes moved over the papers on his desk, the clean rows of names, the times written in Vera's careful hand, the delivery records she had copied from conversations no one thought she was wise enough to understand. Then his gaze lifted to her face. He looked tired, dangerous, and suddenly older than he had the night before. "Tell me," he said. Vera stood beside his desk, with her hands folded in front of her stomach. Her wedding ring caught the pale morning light. "The missing shipments are not random. They vanish only when Malric changes the guard rotation himself, or when one of his men is near the west gate. The servants know it, even if they do not know they know it. They remember who asks for coffee at strange hours. They remember which cars come without headlights. They remember who tells them not to speak." Cassian stepped into the room slowly. "You questioned my staff." "No," Vera said. "I listened." His face changed at that. Not much. Cassian Wolf rarely showed surprise in a way anyone else could read. But Vera had learned him in quiet pieces. The slight stillness of his mouth, the sharp focus in his eyes, the way his hand closed when something cut deeper than he wanted to admit. Vera touched the first paper. 3 weeks ago, a shipment from the North Docks disappeared. That same night, Malric told the kitchen staff not to send supper to the old guardhouse because the men had been reassigned. But the guardhouse stove was still warm the next morning, and Rosa found cigarette ash under the table. "Not your men's brand." 2 nights later, one of your allies changed sides after receiving information only 4 people knew. You, Celine, Malric, and your finance advisor. "My aunt would sell my pride before she sold my blood," Cassian said softly. I know. Vera pointed to another sheet. And your finance advisor is afraid of Malric. I saw it yesterday. He dropped his pen when Malric entered the room. Cassian came closer. The hard air around him seemed to grow colder. You think Malric is feeding my roots to the Ruscari family? I think he is doing more than that. Vera swallowed, forcing herself to keep going. There is a charity banquet tomorrow night, the one for the children's hospital. Everyone important will be there. The mayor, reporters, business owners, your relatives, and the families who still pretend not to fear you. Malric has been asking about the seating chart. He moved the children's choir closer to the east doors. He changed the kitchen entrance schedule, and one of the servants heard him say the words, "Clean fire." Cassian's face went utterly still. Vera felt the fear in the room before he spoke. It came from him, but not for himself. It came like winter beneath a closed door. Clean fire is an old phrase, he said. It means an attack made to look righteous, a public punishment, innocent blood used as proof. Vera's stomach turned. He wants to frame you. Cassian's hand came down on the edge of the desk, not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to make every paper jump. He wants me to answer violence with violence, in a room full of cameras. And if you do, the city turns on you. Your allies panic. The rival families step in as peacekeepers. Vera took a breath. Malric does not need to kill you tomorrow. He just needs to make everyone believe the city is safer without you. For the first time since she had known him, Cassian looked away from her. It hurt more than she expected. Malric was family. Vera knew that blood made some betrayals harder to see. Cassian had built his empire with suspicion, patience, and fear, but there were still names he had trusted because they had stood beside him since childhood. Malric had grown up in the same cold house. He had eaten at the same table. He had learned the same family prayers. If the Wolf family had ever prayed to anything but power, to believe a stranger had betrayed him was business. To believe his cousin had done it was grief. I should have seen it, Cassian said. Vera's voice softened. People see what they expect. You expected him to want your approval. I expected him to underestimate me. Cassian looked back at her. And did he? Yes, she said. Everyone did. There was no pride in the words, only truth. By sunrise, Cassian's study had become the quiet center of a war no one outside the room knew had begun. Men came and went through the private hallway, speaking in low voices, leaving with colder faces than they had entered with. Maps were opened, guest lists were marked, guard posts were changed without explanation. Cassian did not shout, he did not slam doors, he did not promise blood, though every man in the room knew he was capable of it. He listened to Vera. That was what shocked them most. His oldest advisor, Orlan Vale, stood by the fireplace with a silver cane in one hand and a look of thin disgust on his long face. He had never liked Vera. He had never called her anything cruel to her face, but he had a gift for respect that felt like an insult. When Vera explained that the kitchen staff needed to be moved first because Malric had built his plan around them being ignored, Orlan gave a soft laugh. With respect, Mrs. Wolf, kitchen rumors are not intelligence. Cassian turned his head. The room died. Orlan's smile disappeared. Cassian's voice was low. My wife found the leak that bled my docks for 3 months while men I pay fortunes to protect my house blamed ghosts and bad luck. You will not mistake her kindness for permission to be foolish in my presence. Vera felt every eye move to her. Heat rose under her skin, but she did not look down. Orlan bowed his head. Forgive me. Do not ask me, Cassian said. Ask her. The old advisor turned, his mouth stiff. Mrs. Wolf. Vera studied him for a moment. She thought of all the rooms where men like him had spoken over women like her, then called it wisdom. She thought of all the people who waited for cruelty the second they were given power. because they believed cruelty was proof that pain had made them strong. Vera did not want that. She had never wanted people to tremble when she entered a room. "You are forgiven," she said. "Now please listen. We have less than a day." Something moved through the room then, quiet but real. It was not love. It was not loyalty, not yet. It was the first crack in disbelief. The plan Vera made was not loud. Cassian's men wanted to lock down the estate, cancel the banquet, drag Malric into a basement, and tear the truth out of him piece by piece. Vera refused. If they stopped the banquet, Malric would know he had been discovered and vanish into the arms of the rival families. If they confronted him privately, his allies would deny everything, and Cassian would look like a paranoid king attacking his own blood. No, the banquet had to continue. The trap had to stay open. But the people inside it had to be moved without knowing they were being saved. So Vera used the one part of Cassian's world no one respected enough to guard against. The women who served, cleaned, cooked, arranged flowers, carried coats, watched children, and remembered everything. She asked Rosa to change the dessert service so the children's choir would be taken to the West Garden Room after their first song, away from the east doors. She asked the head chef to delay the main course by 9 minutes, just enough to shift the movement of waiters through the ballroom. She asked the drivers to park the city officials' cars near the south entrance, making it natural for security to gather there. She asked Cassian to replace every East Wing guard with men who did not know Malric, but to dress them in the same uniforms so no one would notice. And then she asked for the hardest thing. "At the banquet, you cannot react first," she told Cassian. They were alone in their bedroom when she said it. Outside the windows, night had fallen again, dark and heavy over the estate. Cassian stood near the fireplace, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, the firelight catching the old scars on his hands. Vera sat at the edge of the bed, still in her plain blue dress, exhausted from a day of planning and pretending not to be afraid. His eyes narrowed. "If someone threatens you, I will react. If you do, Malric wins. If someone touches you, the game ends." Cassian. No. His voice was soft, which meant he was closer to fury than if he had shouted. "I can wait while men steal from me. I can wait while they lie. I can let betrayal ripen until it shows its roots. But do not ask me to stand still if you are in danger." Vera rose and walked to him. She placed both hands against his chest. His heart was beating hard beneath her palms. "I am not asking you to stop protecting me," she said. "I am asking you to trust that I can protect you too." His face changed. Pain moved behind his eyes, quick and deep. "You do," he said. "Every day." Vera's throat tightened. Cassian lifted one hand and touched her cheek with a gentleness that still surprised her. "They called you my weakness because they were too blind to recognize shelter. I have lived in houses filled with guards, guns, locked doors, and men who would die on command. None of it ever made me feel safe. Then you looked at my bleeding hand in a room full of fear and offered me a towel." His thumb brushed the soft curve of her cheek. "Do you understand what that did to me?" Vera's eyes burned. "I am scared. I know. Not just of tomorrow. Of what comes after. If this works, people will look at me differently. They will expect me to become hard." Cassian shook his head. "No. They will expect whatever they expect. You will remain Vera. And if remaining Vera is not enough for your world?" His gaze darkened, not with anger at her, but at the world that had taught her to ask. "Then my world can burn and be rebuilt around you." The banquet glittered like a dream built over a grave. The next evening, the Wolf estate opened its iron gates to the city's most powerful people. Cars rolled up the long drive beneath lines of winter trees wrapped in white lights. Women stepped out in satin, men in black suits, cameras flashing near the entrance as reporters praised the Wolf family's generous support of the children's hospital. Inside, the ballroom glowed with candles and gold. White roses filled crystal vases. A string quartet played softly from the balcony. The air smelled of perfume, polished wood, and secrets. Vera stood beside Cassian, at the top of the receiving line, in a deep green gown made of heavy silk. The color suited her, rich and warm against her skin. The neckline was modest, the waist fitted, the skirt full enough to move when she walked. She had wanted to wear black and disappear into the walls. Cassian had simply looked at the gown and said, "No one is hiding tonight." So she stood there, with her shoulders back, while the same people who had whispered at her wedding came to smile at her face. Celine Wolfe approached first, elegant as ever in silver. Her eyes flicked over Vera, then toward Cassian. "A beautiful evening." "It will be," Vera said. Celine paused, hearing something new in her voice. Malric came next. He was handsome in a softer way than Cassian, with bright hair, smooth manners, and eyes that never stayed warm for long. He bent over Vera's hand and kissed the air above her ring. "Cousin," he said to Cassian, "and our lovely Vera, the city adores a generous queen." Vera smiled. "Only if the queen feeds them well." Malric laughed, but his eyes sharpened. "Still thinking like a kitchen woman." "Yes," Vera said gently. "That is why I notice when people leave through service doors." For half a second, his hand tightened around his glass. Then the smile returned. "Careful, Vera. This house teaches everyone to see ghosts." "No," she said. "Only patterns." Cassian stood beside her, silent as a drawn blade. The evening moved forward exactly as Vera had arranged. The children's choir sang beneath the chandelier, sweet voices rising into the painted ceiling. Guests clapped. Reporters filmed. Vera smiled with her hands folded at her waist, counting breaths, watching doors, watching servants, watching Malric. When the song ended, Rosa guided the children away through the west side with a promise of chocolate cake. No one noticed. A mayor's aide complained about the delay in dinner, which pulled 3 officials toward the South Hall. No one noticed. Waiters changed paths. Guards shifted posts. The ballroom turned around Vera's quiet plan, and still the music played. Then the servant came in with the silver tray. Vera saw the tremble first. A young man, pale, sweating, eyes fixed too hard on nothing. He moved from the east entrance toward Cassian's back, carrying covered glasses for the toast. Under the folded cloth at the edge of the tray was the small, dark shape of a blade. The woman nobody thought worthy of a Mafia king's name was the only person in the room who saw the knife before it was raised. Vera stood. She did not scream. She did not run. She picked up her champagne glass from the table and stepped into the servant's path as if greeting him by accident. "Oh, forgive me," she said softly. She tilted the glass. Champagne spilled across the tray and soaked the folded cloth. The young man flinched, and the hidden blade slid halfway into view, catching the light. Cassian turned. So did every guard in the room. But Vera was already speaking. "Please do not hurt him," she said, her voice carrying farther than anyone expected. "He is not the one who planned this." The ballroom froze. The servant's face broke. Tears filled his eyes. "My sister," he whispered. "They have my sister." Malric moved near the edge of the crowd, just one step. Vera saw it. Cassian saw Vera see it. "No one moves," Cassian said. His voice did not rise, but it filled the room like a door locking. The young servant dropped the tray. It crashed against the marble, sending glass and champagne across the floor. A few guests cried out. Cameras turned. Security closed in, but Vera lifted a hand. "Tell them," she said to the servant. "Tell them who gave you the knife." The boy shook his head, shaking so hard he could barely stand. "They'll kill her." "No," Vera said. "They won't. She was moved from the Eastgate safe house 20 minutes ago." Malric's face changed. only for a moment. But in that moment, the mask slipped, and the whole room saw something ugly looking out from behind the charm. Cassian's men brought in 2 bound men from the east wing, both bruised from a struggle but alive. One of them cursed when he saw Malric. The other looked at the floor. Behind them came Rosa, holding the hand of a frightened teenage girl wrapped in a guard's coat. The servant let out a broken sob and tried to run to her, but a guard held him back gently. Vera looked at Malric. You used his sister to make him strike Cassian in front of witnesses. If Cassian killed him here, the cameras would capture a powerful man murdering a poor servant at a charity banquet. If Cassian spared him, the blade would still be found, and people would say he staged a threat for sympathy. Either way, you planned to make him look guilty. Malric laughed. It was the wrong sound, too light, too sharp. My dear Vera, he said, spreading his hands, you have been spending too much time with frightened staff and sad little kitchen girls. Vera nodded once to the balcony. The music stopped. For a second, there was only confused silence. Then the speakers hidden around the ballroom crackled. Malric's own voice filled the room, smooth and amused, speaking from a recording taken hours before in the east corridor. By the banquet, Cassian will either look like a butcher or a fool. Once the city turns, the Ruscari family backs me, Celine stays quiet, and the old advisors beg me to save the wolf name. A shocked sound rolled through the ballroom. Malric's face drained of color. Vera did not look away from him. People forget servants hear through doors. They forget drivers check cars. They forget cooks know which rooms stay warm after midnight. They forget invisible people are still present. Cassian stepped forward then, slow and terrible. Men who had mocked Vera at her wedding lowered their eyes. Women who had called her an embarrassment pressed gloved hands to their mouths. Reporters kept filming because no one dared tell them to stop. Malric backed up. Cassian, this is absurd. You're going to believe her over blood? Cassian's expression was empty of mercy. I believed her before she proved it. The words landed harder than any threat. Malric's face twisted. She has made you weak. No, Cassian said. She made me patient. That is why you are still alive long enough to be ashamed in public. Malric lunged for the fallen knife. He never reached it. 2 guards seized him before his hand touched the floor. The room erupted, but Cassian raised one hand, and the noise died. Malric struggled, his handsome face red with rage and humiliation. You think they will respect her, he spat. You think these people will bow to a fat little kitchen woman because she played detective for one night? They will laugh when this is over. They will always laugh. For the first time, Cassian looked ready to kill him. But Vera stepped between them. The room saw it. Everyone saw it. The feared head of the Wolf family, held back not by guards, not by law, not by fear of cameras, but by Vera's small, steady hand against his chest. She faced Malric. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, but her voice stayed calm. Maybe they will, she said. People laughed before. They laughed at my dress, my body, my hands, my work, my marriage. They laughed because it made them feel taller. But laughter is not power, Malric. It is just noise people make when they do not understand what they are looking at. His eyes burned with hatred. Vera continued, softer now. You wanted Cassian's throne because you thought power meant being feared, but fear made you sloppy. You ignored the workers. You ignored the women. You ignored the hungry, the tired, the quiet, the people carrying trays and coats and keys. You ignored me. She took a breath. That is why you lost. No one spoke. Cassian turned to his guards. Take him. Malric was dragged from the ballroom while every ally he had hoped to command watched him leave in disgrace. No gunfire, no screaming revenge, no blood spilled beneath the chandelier, just exposure, clean and final. in a room full of witnesses who could never pretend they had not seen the truth. The Ruscari representatives slipped out before dessert. Two of Cassian's advisors tried to follow, but found the exits quietly blocked. By midnight, the betrayal had been contained. By dawn, every stolen route had been recovered, every false account frozen, every man who had fed secrets to Malric removed from Cassian's circle. Some disappeared into prisons, some into exile, some simply vanished from the city's polite conversations and were never mentioned again. But what people remembered most was not the punishment. They remembered Vera. They remembered the fat woman in the green gown standing beneath the chandelier, saving children without frightening them, stopping murder without becoming cruel, and revealing a traitor with the same calm voice she once used to ask hungry customers if they wanted more bread. After that night, the city changed around her. At first, it was small. Guards who had once looked past her began opening doors before she reached them. Advisors who had spoken slowly now waited for her opinion. Celine Wolfe, proud and cold, came to the kitchen one morning and stood by the door for several minutes before saying, "I misjudged you." Vera looked up from the pot she was stirring. "Yes." Celine's mouth tightened. Then, to Vera's surprise, she gave a faint nod. "I will try not to do it again." "That would be wise," Vera said, and went back to stirring. Cassian laughed about it later, quietly, into her hair. But Vera did not want respect that lived only inside the estate. She had not saved Cassian's empire because she wanted to sit on velvet chairs and be feared by men in suits. She wanted doors unlocked. She wanted children fed. She wanted old buildings repaired before winter. She wanted women like the ones she had known all her life to stop being treated as background furniture in rooms they kept alive. So she began with Maribel's. Cassian gave her money. Vera gave it purpose. The restaurant became the first of many kitchens, not fancy places with gold signs and rich donors smiling for photographs, but warm rooms with strong soup, clean tables, and no questions asked at the door. Then came shelters with real beds. Then a school program for children who needed somewhere safe after dark. Then a small legal office above Maribel's where women could get help leaving men who hurt them. Cassian's empire had once run on fear. Vera did not pretend it had become innocent because she loved him. But she turned every piece of influence she could reach toward protection, and the city felt it. People who had once whispered about her body now whispered about her work. Then they stopped whispering and started asking, "Can Mrs. Wolfe help with the clinic? Can Mrs. Wolfe speak to the landlord? Can Mrs. Wolfe come to the school opening? Can Mrs. Wolfe meet the mothers from the East Block?" Vera answered when she could. She listened always. Months passed. Winter softened into spring. The city that had watched her enter the Wolfe family as a scandal now watched her stand at the front steps of the new Belmont Community House while cameras flashed and children crowded near the ribbon. It had once been an abandoned bank, cold and empty, with broken windows and graffiti across the stone. Now it held classrooms, a food pantry, a medical room, a kitchen, and a wide hall where people could gather without paying for the right to exist. The mayor gave a speech. It was too polished. Vera barely heard it. She was watching a little girl in the front row tug at her mother's sleeve and point at her green dress with open admiration. The girl was round-faced, shy, and soft in the way Vera had once been soft before the world told her softness was a flaw. When Vera smiled at her, the girl smiled back like a candle had been lit. Then it was Vera's turn. She stepped to the microphone. The crowd quieted. Cassian stood a few feet behind her in a black suit, his face calm, his eyes only on her. To the public, he was still Cassian Wolfe, still feared, still dangerous, still a man whose name made powerful people choose their words carefully. But Vera knew the man behind the silence now. The man who sat with her in the kitchen at night, The man who let children climb on his expensive shoes because Vera told them he would not bite. The man who still carried darkness, yes, but no longer worshipped it. Vera looked out at the crowd. She saw wolf relatives, former critics, rival families who had come because staying away would look like weakness, reporters, workers, widows, children, women who had spent their whole lives being told they were too much, not enough, too poor, too plain, too heavy, too ordinary to matter. Her hands did not shake. For most of my life, Vera said, people looked at me and decided what I was worth before I opened my mouth. They thought my body told the whole story. They thought kindness meant I was simple. They thought quiet meant I was empty. They were wrong. The crowd was still. I used to believe I had to become smaller to be safe, smaller in my body, smaller in my hopes, smaller in the space I took up. But every person deserves a place where they do not have to shrink to be loved, fed, protected, or heard. Vera glanced back at Cassian. His face was unreadable to everyone else, but she saw the emotion in his eyes. This house is for those people, for the ones who have been overlooked, for the ones who learned to survive judgment before they learned to dream, for the ones who were told they did not belong in beautiful rooms. She turned back to the crowd. You belong here. For a moment, there was silence. Then the applause rose. It did not come all at once. It began with the workers near the back, then the mothers, then the children. Then, slowly, even the polished guests in their expensive coats joined in, because the room had changed and they knew it. Vera Belmont Wolfe stood before them, not thinner, not colder, not remade into the kind of woman they had once wanted beside a king. She stood soft, steady, intelligent, and completely herself. Cassian stepped beside her after the ribbon was cut. He did not take the microphone. He did not need to. He simply offered her his hand in front of everyone. Vera placed her hand in his. The same relatives who had mocked her wedding watched in silence. The rivals who had called her his weakness looked away first. The critics who once measured her worth by the size of her body now had to measure the size of what she had built, and that was a much harder thing to dismiss. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the sun was setting over the city, Vera stood alone in the new kitchen. The ovens were not running yet, but she could already imagine them warm. She could imagine soup on the stove, bread on the counters, children laughing in the hall, tired women sitting down for the first safe meal of their day. Cassian found her there, leaning against the doorway. You always end up in the kitchen, he said. Vera smiled without turning around. That's where people tell the truth. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her gently back against him. There had been a time when Vera would have stiffened, worried about the softness of her body pressed against his. That time felt far away now, like a sad story she remembered, but no longer lived inside. Are you happy? He asked. Vera looked around the room, at the clean counters, at the wide windows, at the place that would feed people long after the applause was gone. Yes, she said, but not because they finally respect me. No? She turned in his arms and looked up at him, because I finally believe I never needed their permission. Cassian's hand rose to her face. His thumb brushed her cheek with the same careful touch he had used the first night she cleaned blood from his hand. They were fools, he said. They were people, Vera answered softly. People can learn. His mouth curved, faint and private. You still believe that? I have to. Otherwise all we do is punish. Cassian studied her with that quiet wonder he had never fully learned to hide. And you still chose me. Vera touched the front of his coat, right over his heart. Yes, but I did not choose the monster they feared. I chose the man who wanted to become more than what fear made him. His eyes darkened with feeling. Outside, the last light of evening spread across the city. Somewhere beyond the windows, men still whispered Cassian Wolfe's name with caution. Somewhere, enemies still planned, because darkness never vanished just because one woman lit a candle. But the city was not the same. Neither was the Wolf family. Neither was Vera. She had not become a queen by learning to frighten people. She had become one by refusing to disappear. The girl from the backroom kitchen, the woman they called too heavy, too plain, too ordinary, had stood inside a house of wolves and taught them the cost of underestimating the gentle. She had saved a feared man without losing her soul. She had faced cruelty without becoming cruel. She had turned a throne built from silence into a table wide enough for the hungry. And when Cassian lowered his head and kissed her beneath the soft lights of the kitchen, it was not the kiss of a king claiming a prize. It was the kiss of a man who knew he had been saved by the one person everyone else had been foolish enough to overlook. Vera Belmont Wolf closed her eyes and smiled against his mouth. She was not smaller, she was not colder, she was not the woman they had wanted her to become. She was simply Vera. And at last, the whole city knew that was more than enough.